Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Tonight, this might be a surprise for a couple of people when they realise who it is, but it's one of my old battery commanders, which I'm quite surprised that he's agreed to come on here. You know what it is? You said, right, you can call me Richard, and it just seemed fucking weird that I can't. You know what I mean? It's like, right, so I'll try, and if I sound a bit weird saying it, right. So
I
say
was
hello
impressed.
to
I
Richard
remember the
Collinge.
nickname from the lads.
Yeah. Well, that's what everyone used to call me anyway. If anyone calls me
Yeah.
Andrew, I always think it's a bit funny. Yeah. So, welcome to the podcast, Richard. Podcast, Richard. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah. Good to see you after so many years.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. Yeah, 2006, as we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. So, again, with this podcast, we're just going to talk about your career and what you did and what you've done afterwards as well. So, it's the normal questions that we ask anybody. So, if you could just tell us where you grew up and why you joined the army.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Lincolnshire. I was born in Sheffield. So I'm a Yorkshireman, really, but nobody ever thinks I sound like a Yorkshireman or act like a Yorkshireman. But
No.
I was born in Sheffield, so I always reckon I could, if I really wanted to, I could play cricket for Yorkshire County Cricket Club. But I never have done, obviously. But it's always there in the bag if I ever need it, you know. Yeah, so born in Sheffield, but brought up in Lincolnshire. And if anyone's ever been to Lincolnshire, you'll understand why I joined the army because there's not much in Lincolnshire. If you're growing up as a teenager in Lincolnshire, it's flat fields and nowhere to go or do anything really. So I joined the army because I wasn't bright enough to do anything else. I scraped me 2 A levels to get me to Sandhurst. That's what I needed, and headed away from Lincolnshire to join the army. And I think at some stage somebody in the gunners said, "Oh yeah, we've got a camp in Curtin Lindsey. We'll get you back there if you like, back to Lincolnshire." I said, "No, you're not. If you send me back to Lincolnshire, I'm signing off. It's the reason I've joined the army is to get away from Lincolnshire." So yeah, that's how I ended up in the army. Um, Ended up my first step into the army actually was as a as a soldier, as a gunner Collinge at 17 Training Regiment in Woolwich, because in those days they ran a thing called the Potential Officers Course or the Plonks Course, and it was a sort of I think it was a 6-week course where you went to Woolwich, you basically got thrashed, and that sort of was supposed to prepare you for going to Sandhurst, and of course you can imagine, which was then the Phase 1 Training Regiment for the Royal Artillery. You can imagine what it was like because you were the lowest of the low as a potential officer gunner. You know, you didn't even rank as high as the recruit. So it was quite an experience. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, was it a big shock? Hang on, just going back a minute. Where in Lincolnshire were you from?
So Sleaford was where
Right.
home was.
So,
Yeah,
when I joined the army, I'm from the northeast. Obviously, I'm from Hartlepool.
yeah,
I joined the army, went to junior leaders, went home on my first leave, walked in the house, and I was looking around thinking everything's different. And luckily, and I mean luckily, my sister come walking downstairs and went, "What are you doing here?" I says, "What are you on about? I live here. I'm on leave." She went, "No, you don't. I live here now. Mum and Dad's moved." And I was like, "Where?" And they said, "Grantham." I was like, "Where's
yeah,
that?" Lincolnshire. I was like, "Where's that?" So I had a couple of days in Hartlepool, and then I got on a bus down to Grantham for my first time. My mum and dad lived there from '85 until my mum passed away in 2010. So I kind of know Lincolnshire a little bit. Never been to Sleaford, but
yeah,
I know when you say you
yeah.
want to get away from Lincolnshire, I can quite understand that. It's a weird place.
So Grantham was where you catch a train to from King's Cross to get away from Woolwich. And, I can remember coming back on my first sort of leave chit to Grantham and getting off the train and heading home to Sleaford. But yeah, so that's why I left. And I say getting to Woolwich was quite an experience. I think you were told to arrive in jacket and tie. You can imagine how what that was like arriving at Woolwich in those days in jacket and tie. You stood out like a sore thumb. As soon as I arrived at the guard room, he started getting beasted at the guard room. There was a guy there called Bombardier Clark who went on to he was from 50 Missile, which ended up being my first regiment, and just by coincidence, Bombardier Clark happened to be in my first command, my launcher section. And I remember being introduced to him by my sergeant, and he looked at me and I looked at him, and clocked me and I clocked him, and he said, "You don't bear a grudge, do you, sir?" And I said, "No, it's all right." But yeah, what goes around comes around, you know.
Yeah. So I mean,
And
I don't know
it was
how
quite.
to put this. So to get to Sandhurst to do the potential officers course, was there a criteria that you had to meet to get to the potential officers course, and did many
No,
people fail it?
no, not really. In fact, I think if I remember rightly, you did a thing called, in those days it was the Regular Commissions Board, pre-Regular Commissions Board, and actually, if you
Yeah.
went to that and they thought you were quite young, which it did me, you were then recommended to go on the potential officers course. So it wasn't necessarily a feather in your cap to go to the potential officers course. It was your first
Oh,
next
right.
hurdle to get through, sort of thing. And they had it was a place called the Slim Block next door to the gym. If anybody remembers that back end of the camp, there was like a prefab building called the Slim Block, and that was the potential officers block, or they call us the plonks at the time. And it had a bar above it, and it said 10 before you enter. And literally, you know, having been beast at the guard room and pulled my suitcase round to the Slim Block, then I was met by these two 9 regiment sergeants who, so one of them looked out the window at me, and as I was trying to bring the suitcase into the building, said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I said, I'm Mr. Collinge. I'm coming here for the potential officers course." He said, "You can't even read. What are you doing here?" And he pointed to his sign that said 10 before you enter. And I sort of looked at him and said, what do you mean 10 before I enter? And then he pointed up to this bar, and it was like, "Oh, right, 10 heaves before I enter. Okay, got it." And every time you went in and out of the building, you had to do 10 heaves. Whether you were just emptying a bin, going to the cookhouse, whatever, it was 10 heaves before you enter, you know. So you soon got ready for your physical tests at Sandhurst.
Yeah. So what was Sandhurst like then, turning up there? Was it what you
Yeah,
expected,
Sandhurst.
or?
Well, so I did a long officers course, because I then got through. I went to the regular commissions board, so I've done the pre-regular commissions board, ended up with potential officers course with the gunners, and then went to the regular commissions board. And again, if they thought you were a bit young, so it was pretty typical for a guy who'd not been to university, scraped his 2A levels. You know, you were given the sort of longer course. So there was a thing at Sandhurst called Rowling Company, which was a 3-month beasting. And again, I had a chap called Staff Glenn was my instructor. He went on to be RSM at 29 Commando. Um, and I remember him saying to us at the end of this rallying company, I think it was 3-month beasting. He said, "Any of you guys want to go for the commando course, give it a go, because you've been through that and worse on this." And it was there's a good book being written by one of the instructors recently about it, and I read it, and it was a very different way of teaching leadership. Very much the school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
Later on, I went on to be CEO at Pirbright, and the things they did to us then, there was no way on earth I was allowed to do any of that. So one of the things they did was they had two platoons, and one competed against the other in everything you did. So, and they said, we reward success and punish failure. So if you were the platoon that lost, you'd be punished. And we had a couple of times where we were out in Wales, and they'd do a few physical tests, log run or something like that, and we'd lose. So we go without rations that night, and the next morning we get up, so right, stretch a race, and of course the other lot have had food, we haven't, so we're not hiding to nothing. So you lose that, and then you don't get
Yeah.
lunch, and you just go down and down and down, and the staff start to say, "Guys, you've got to pull out the bag, because you are not going to get any better. If you don't win this one, you've had it." And you put a massive effort in, and you just scrape it out, scrape the barrel and pull it out the bag, and manage to get some food or something, which would keep you going. But it was very much the school of hard knocks, but it was great. And I made lifetime friends on that, and I reckon some of the best officers I've served alongside have done that course. And it's, only a small percentage of people did it, as opposed to the full Sandhurst course. But in my personal opinion, every officer should do it, because it's proper hard school, getting knocked about, and really, really testing your mettle, testing whether you're really up for this, you really
Yeah.
want to be an officer, and you learn a lot about yourself going through it all as well.
Would you think that? I mean, you look. I mean, you got out the army a lot later, got a lot higher, seen a lot more. Um, I've noticed that it seems to be the army's not what it was, not when we joined, not back then. And that's fine. Army's changed, military changes, everything changes. Society's changed. But do you think that training now, or even 10 year ago, or 15 year ago, was it too light? The training when I
So
was in was quite hard. People who were older than me would say it's harder then, type of thing. But do you think to go what you went through with the ramen company there, do you think it would be better to have something more robust in place than what they currently have now?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was passionate about what I did at Rallying Company. I think it was the making of me as a young man, and I really, in hindsight, I really enjoyed it. I perhaps didn't at the time, but I was quite, I still wear it as a badge of pride. As people I bump into now, and we all say, yeah, we're a Rallying Company or did Roco, and it means something.
Yeah,
But I was also CEO of Pirbright, as I say, about what was it, 2009 to 2011, something like that. And actually, I used to get a bit irritated when people say, the recruits aren't like they used to be, and we were right in the thick of Afghanistan at that stage, and just
yeah,
about every man and woman that I had on parade with me knew exactly what they were signing up for. They were about to do phase 2 training, and most of them were about to head out to Afghanistan, and they were all absolutely up for it. And
yeah,
so I used to get a little bit irritated when I'd get some folks that come who had maybe done, national service, or they'd maybe done the time when, the British Army wasn't doing anything other than maybe going to Northern Ireland. Not to belittle that at all, because, we know we lost a lot of people out there, and that was very difficult and dangerous as well. But um, they would sort of look at these young men and women, and say they're not like they used to be. And I said, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that, because these people know exactly what they're signing themselves up for. And I'd take it. Look at myself when I went through Sandhurst. There was Northern Ireland, and there was the Cold War. But
yeah,
I didn't expect to finish Sandhurst and be straight out on operations of the scale of what was happening in Afghanistan, with the risk of losing limbs and lives and all the rest of it. So, I still rate those people under command of me. What it's like now, I'm not quite sure, but certainly 10 years or so ago, um, there was different training. There was, there's lots of things we weren't allowed to do that were probably done to you and me when we were in training, but I don't think it sort of made it any less valuable. And certainly the quality of the people who were putting themselves forward to go through it, I think, was just as high as we were. And let's face it, it's all very well as older people to sit back and look at the youth and think they're not like us, but frankly, some of us were just as useless as when we were going through
yeah,
training
about that.
as they
Yeah,
were when they were going through training.
yeah. I mean, it's like you look on Facebook and you see all the old guys whinging about the SA80. Oh, it wasn't as good as the SLR. Well, I had both of them, and I preferred the SA80. It
Yeah,
was easier to carry. And I
yeah,
never had
yeah,
an issue with it, to be honest. I don't know why, but
yeah,
it's it is just it's the youth's wasted on the youth, isn't it? That type of thing.
yeah. It is.
I
It's
think
true.
I think we're all a bit jealous, really, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's funny you say about
So you
SA80s,
moved
because
from
mentioning.
sorry, yeah,
Well, I was going to say it's funny you say about SA80 mentioning Sandhurst, because my course was my proper Sandhurst course. After I'd done Rallying Company, then do a year standard military course if you're a non-graduate. In those days, the graduates used to do 6 months, but a non-graduate you do a year. And we were the first course to ever have the SA80. So I trained on the SA80 at Sandhurst, and then arrived at 50 Missile Regiment to be given an SLR. And I thought, what the hell is this thing? And in those days, they
yeah,
weren't so strict on weapon handling tests and everything else. So it was just made it up as you went along, really.
yeah. I mean, the first time I touched an SA80 was before the regiment had as well. So I was in 47 then, and I had a bit of extended leave. I went AWOL for about 6 months, 6.5 months, and then up an MCTC, and I was doing weapon handling drill with SA80 in MCTC. When I come out and got to the regiment, I was like, oh, I can't go back to the SLR type of thing. So I was like miles ahead of everyone else for that as well. It was quite good.
Yeah, yeah.
So if the long Sandhurst course, the full 12 months, what was that like?
It's for those people that done Rallying Company, it's never quite as taxing. I mean, I probably lost fitness, while I was going through that
Right.
part of the course. And there's in my platoon, there was maybe 2 or 3 of us, maybe 4, who'd done rallying company, and we stood out from others. I remember we did a sort of 24-hour exercise where you yomp over, I forget what it is now, the South Downs Way or something like that. And it's done as a competition. And my colour sergeant was determined we were going to win. So he handpicked this 4-man team. And there was me, there was another guy done rallying company with me. There was a guy who'd been in the ranks in the parachute regiment. And there was another guy who'd been in the ranks in the sappers. And he said, "You're the team," and yeah, we smashed it because we were just we're just used to just grueling ourselves and getting on with it, and it was great. I mean, we were the winning team from Santos. It was great, but yeah, we made a bit of a spectacle of ourselves the next day. We went up to prize giving because we'd absolutely thrashed ourselves in the good old fashioned boots, not the things that people have nowadays, and our feet were absolutely in bits, and we were wearing brown in those days for Santos. All sorts of different forms of dress, but one of them was sort of normal trousers and brown shoes, like an officer's brown shoes, all balled up and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. And, leather soled and everything else. And so trying to march out in these brown shoes to go and get our prizes with blisters all over our feet. We must have looked the right sight, but yeah, it was nice. It was nice to smash the prize and win it.
So what does the course of Sandex actually entail? I mean, I
Yeah,
kind
so
of know, I've got, but also I don't.
so they stretch it over 3 terms, and it's the first term is probably very akin to soldiers' basic training or phase 1 training. So back to basics really. Take your personality away and rebuild you. So lots of block inspections, albeit you've got a room of your own at Sandhurst rather than in a barrack room, but room inspections every morning. Lots of drill, lots of weapon handling, lots of first aid, lots of NBC or CBRN training. All the same standard military stuff that you do on in a soldier's phase 1 or basic training course. And then the second term, and gradually through that first term, they start to introduce you to a bit of leadership. You start doing. It's all based on infantry work. So the idea is that every officer is trained as an infantier through the Santos course. That's the vehicle that they use to train you, and that's the vehicle they use to test your leadership. So nothing else, regardless of cap badge. When you come out of Santos, you've got infantry skills. And actually, I reflect that. I think you would have been in D Battery for Telic 1, so you would have gone and been an artilleryman proper with Mike Weymouth and
Yeah.
others as the BC. But all of my operational tours have, ironically, having been a gunner and ended up as regimental colonel of gunners, I've never done an operational tour firing guns. I've always done an operational tour as an infantryman. But actually, that Santos training, paid dividends. Because quite often you find yourself in a position, on an operational tour where you, albeit you might be getting a bit rusty, you use a lot of infantry skills, whereas some of the guys around you, had done very little infantry training. So it's quite a good vehicle for Sandhurst and for the army to make sure that every one of its officers
Yeah.
has got a sort of some infantry skills. If you say it's an infanteria course, they'll just laugh and say, how on earth a gunner or a sapper or a loggy think they've got any infantry skills? But they've got a basic standard training. So you build up through the what an infantryman would then do. So you're doing section battle drills, you're doing platoon battle drills, company battle drills, and all the time you're switching around your command appointments. So sometimes you'll be a platoon commander, sometimes you'll be a platoon sergeant, section commander, whatever, and they're assessing you in all of those command appointments, and so that's sort of first as you build into the first term. Then the second term you're building up, and then the third term is much more sort of aligned to deeper thought about leadership and that sort of stuff, and start to develop other skills and planning exercises and how to arrange management qualifications and the sort of skill sets that you're going to need as an officer when you first arrive in a regiment. So they build it up from the bottom up, and then there's a smattering all the way through of things like adventurous training to get you some adventurous training qualifications so you can take guys away on adventurous training. There's some community service stuff to give you a sort of I guess, keep you a bit humble and keep you sort of grounded, so going to work in various places. I went for 1 week and we worked in a sort of uh, uh, home for children with physical and mental difficulties, and that was quite enlightening. We arrived there. I think there was four of us who arrived there, and it was in this sort of home setup. So it's like a bungalow set up for I don't know, maybe 6, 8 kids, something like that. And when we arrived, the sort of lead person there said, right, there's one of the lads you've got to watch out for. He's 13, 14, but make sure you keep the kitchen door closed because he has a thing where he'll run and try and put his hands on the hot stoves. So just make sure you keep the kitchen door closed. That was a sort of safety brief we were given. And we'd only been in this place for about, I don't know, half an hour or so. And for some reason, I always remember looking down the corridor. It just so happened there was, at different spacings, the four of us happened to be in this corridor, and the kitchen door had been opened by somebody else. And this young lad was down the bottom end of the corridor, and I was fourth in the line, so fourth away from this lad. And he made a sprint for it. And he was only 14. He was quite slight. But these kids have sort of really immense strength. They don't really feel pain. And he came storming down the corridor, screaming his head off. And the first Santa's gonna just went flying. Second one went flying. Third went flying. I'm looking and thinking, blimey, it's just me. It's me, me between him and the flipping hot stove. And I put all my weight and all my strength into it, and I just managed to get him to the ground. But flipping heck, it was quite something to watch him just knocking Santa's cadets out left, right, and centre. And the strength and the power that he came at us was quite something. So it's little things like that sort of give you a bit of taste of wider life, and and also make you respect how fortunate you are to be where you are.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. So after Sandhurst, it's the YO's course, isn't it?
Yeah, Wise course at Lock Hill. Yeah, so that's a I forget what it was now. It's probably I think it was a 3 month course, if I remember rightly. So you do a bit of general introduction to the gunners and that sort of stuff, and then pretty quickly get streamed off into wherever you're going. And and four of us were told we were going to go to 50 Missile Regiment, and actually, I remember the instructor at the time said it a bit sort of tongue in cheek, and said, and four lucky lads are off to 50 Missile Regiment. And I'll say lucky lads because don't forget, in my day, it was a male course. We hadn't yet introduced female officers or soldiers into the gunners. That will happen later in my career. So
Yeah.
so he made this joke about four lucky lads off to 50 Missile. And I've always said, if I'd have known what I know now. The evening he was sort of having this thing, I'd have put my hand up and volunteered straight away and said, "We count me in," because I love my time in 50 Missile Regiment. It's an amazing, amazing regiment. I say that as if it still exists, because in many respects it still does. You only have to look
Yeah.
at Facebook and elsewhere. I don't know what it is about 50 Missile Regiment, but the esprit de corps is immense. I think it's probably because it was such a unique regiment and had such a unique role. And people tended to only be posted there. So officers again, as you know, officers get posted between regiments. So I never went back to 50 Missile Regiment. In fact, I was there when it disbanded. But the
Yeah.
soldiers had, many of them were sort of arrived there as gunners and were finishing off as BSMs, RSMs. Spent their whole lives there. So it had an amazing esprit de corps, and quite a nice place to be. As I reflect on my sort of life, quite a nice place to have been posted. Literally, as at the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall came down while we were there.
Yeah.
So I got a chance to experience the Cold War and the end of the Cold War, and it was quite a unique place to be to experience that. I remember the day the Berlin Wall came down, and a load of us said, right, in the officers' mess, a load of subalterns said, right, we're going to jump in a car and we're going to head off to Berlin. That's the place to be. It's going to be an amazing party. 50 Missile was in a little town called Menden, just south of Dortmund. And we said, right, we're going to jump in a car and head off to Berlin. And the adjutant came in and said, where the hell do you think you guys are going? We're so off to Berlin. It's going to be brilliant, great party. He said, you're in a nuclear deterrence regiment. You're not getting anywhere. Never has the nuclear deterrent been more likely to be required than about this time in history. So you're not getting anywhere, folks. It's like, blimey. And we knew at the time it was probably a bit excessive. We were going to just miss a good party rather than be required to do anything operationally. But such is life, you know.
I mean, like you say, 50 Missile was a very unique regiment. My one of the not my training sergeant, but the upstairs in ours, Dixon Troop. Their troop sergeant was from 50 Missile. Stroud, Sergeant Stroud, I think his name was.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah,
he used to gloat about 50 Missile a lot, and the rest of the artillery just used to think, oh, they're on in tracksuit all the time.
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't really know anything about 50 Missile, just from, oh, they're in tracksuits until later on when they disbanded and everyone got split to everyone. So a lot of guys turned up at 4-7 with us. And some of them have been in what was the battery called? The special, it was like the
yeah.
infantry battery,
Special
wasn't it?
defence, special. Well, they had each
Yeah,
battery had a special defence group, and interesting we were saying about infantry training because they were
yeah,
gunners who were trained as infantryers. They went and did the Brecon course, senior Brecon, junior Brecon for the sergeants and the NCOs, and they were proper infantry trained soldiers with a gunner cap badge. Quite
yeah.
something, really.
Yeah, we noticed. They were quite good at what they did.
Yeah,
They kind of
yeah,
shone amongst the rest of us. And it was like
yeah,
talking to them. And again, like saying, just like what I've just said, we didn't really know about 50 Missile.
yeah,
And it was what they were saying about like the deployments, working with the Americans, the deployments of the Lance and stuff like that. And it was like, this is another world. It was like a separate army almost. It was like,
yeah,
I wouldn't say it was
yeah.
secret, but there was quite a lot of it that was like nobody got to know about it until afterwards.
No, it was. I mean, it was quite amazing that the special defence group in itself was quite something. Their job was to defend the nuclear missiles. Whenever we went to a battery hide, they would put up a proper defensive position around the battery hide and stuff. And as you say, the Americans were there. So the Americans provided the warhead. The British provided the firing systems and all of that, but the Americans provided the warhead. So this weird group called the 69th United States Field Army Detachment were based in Mendon with us. Only a few of them, but their job was basically to report back to the president that the Brits were going to point the warhead in the right direction, frankly, and not doing something weird and wonderful with it. It was quite a funny relationship. There was all sorts of sort of things that went on with the Americans. I mean, they were, it was interesting watching them because we used to get paid in Deutschmarks in those days. It wasn't the euro. We got paid in Deutschmarks. We would sort of try to integrate with the local community. But the Americans get paid in dollars. There were a couple of American officers in the mess with us. We'd say, come out for a few beers. And they saw only if someone could lend us some Deutschmarks because I've only got dollars, and it was a very unique setup, really strange. And of course, they were miles from any other American organisations. They were
Yeah,
all further down
yeah.
south in Germany, so they were miles from PXs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it was quite a unique setup. And 50 Missile itself was, like you say, a bit sort of cloak and dagger. I mean, we were told we were regularly followed by Spetsnaz when we went on exercise. When we deployed on exercise, you'd have three of the firing batteries. One would go by road, one would go by rail, and one would be helicoptered out. There was a way you could break down the Lance missiles. There was just a sort of frame with wheels as opposed to the tracked variants that people will probably be familiar with. And one of the batteries would be told to break it down into that framed version, and they'd be flown out. So, and that was a dispersal plan deliberately to try and throw off anybody who was trying to follow us out the camp gates. And it was what would have happened in war, but it was also necessity because they reckoned that people were watching us on exercise and stuff. So and
Oh yeah, the
regularly,
old socks missing out, wasn't it?
yeah, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and, we used a launcher section was a firing vehicle, and then two 432s. That was my command as a second lieutenant. So there was me, a sergeant, and a team of guys of about 10 of us, I think, in total, with those three vehicles. And when you got your firing orders, you went off into the German countryside again. It was those exercises where we used to exercise anywhere in the German countryside, and you go off and you literally be on your own, and you provide your own protection. But a couple of times we'd box in suspicious vehicles and call the military police because we thought we were being tailed and stuff, and we used the 432s to box them in. Do sort of 3 or 4 sides of a square on the map and come back round and box these cars in, and stuff. So it's fun times.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been quite sad with them disbanding then. Or had you left, or were you there when they disbanded?
No, I was the drawdown captain. So they started to whittle people away, and they closed down most of the camp. They closed down the officers' mess. They had two quarters that they requisitioned, and in one of the quarters there was the adjutant. There was me as the drawdown captain. There was a drawdown lieutenant chap called Jim Pritchett, who people might know quite well. He still lives near me in Salisbury. Um, uh, and I think we might have had the assistant adjutant as well. And then the QM tech, I think the paymaster, and that was about it. That was, and the CO, of course, and that was all that was left to draw down the regiment, and that was it. And it's funny you say about people being posted away, because my BC, I was in 19 Battery. My BC got posted to 12 Regiment, and he was about to go to North Island, and I was due to stay with 50 Missile into the new year, whatever year that was. I can't remember now. It would have been about 2003, 2004, something like that. And he called me up over Christmas leave and said, "I'm going to North Island with my battery, but my ops officer can't deploy anymore, and I need ops officer." And I've had a chat with CO 50 Missile, and if you're happy, he's happy to release you early to come to North Island. And of course, in those days, I was over the moon, because 50 Missile didn't do tours. I had done a Cyprus tour, but I hadn't done a proper tour, as I call it.
Yeah.
And so I was over the moon. It ruined my mum and dad's Christmas, especially my mum's Christmas. You can imagine going home and telling mum I was off to Northern Ireland in a few weeks' time. She was that was a not exactly the best Christmas present for her, but I was over the moon. And and I went to 12 Regiment, but as it happened, I arrived and joined about 100 other people from 50 Missile who'd also come over from the regiment as the regiment disbanded, and they never really, for the time I was there, the 3 years I was there, they never really broke down that sort of uniqueness. And I can remember the CO once getting me in and saying, "Rich, what's going on? Because you got this little this little sort of private army within 12 Regiment, this 50 Missile bunch. We've got to get them better integrated." I said, "Well, you can't expect me to do that. That's your job, sir. They are what they are. They've got a really immense esprit de corps, and they really love the place they've come from, and it's going to take a while for them to settle into the new place."
I mean, we found that with any battery coming into like 3 RHA, N battery came in, and it was the same. It
Yeah,
took them a long time to integrate, and
yeah,
us being sent from 4.7 up to 3 RHA. I think we were quite lucky though, because when we turned up there, they were in Ireland, so we like hit there with the rear party, and then again there was a lot of people from like 4.9, second field, 50 missile, and we were the rear
yeah,
party and we kind of gelled together. I was teaching guys from 50 missile. This is an FH70. This is what a gun looks like. And
yeah,
I was
yeah,
teaching them how to use the gun and stuff like that, and they
yeah,
were loving it. They were absolutely loving it.
yeah,
And then when the
yeah,
regiment came back, we kind of had our own little group, but it wasn't too bad with that. I must admit, we integrated quite well in the end.
yeah.
But when
12, 12
a whole unit comes in, it's different.
yeah, yeah. And 12 was a good place for people to go, because just at that time they were getting HVM, the high velocity missile, the Stormer tracked vehicle.
Yeah,
So it was new for everyone, because they'd been, Rapier before that. So it was new for everyone. So actually, it was quite a good time for people to integrate, because it was a completely new ballgame. No one had ever had HVM or Stormer before. People are surprised now when they look at the size of what, certainly 12 Regiment was as I left, and certainly a few years before I left the army. But in those days, 12 Regiment, with its new Orbat and its new equipment, was the largest armoured regiment in the British Army. It was amazing, much bigger than the tanky and recce units and that sort of stuff. It was massive. And of course it was brand new for everyone, a brand new way of operating, brand new equipment. Exciting times actually to have been a regiment when it was like that. And having come back from Northern Ireland, I became the regimental signals officer, which was a bit of a change in itself, because years before the gunners had regimental signals officers, but it'd been an LE appointment, and someone in their wisdom decided it was going to be a DE appointment, but there wasn't a DE training course. There wasn't any sort of, they had a course,
yeah. I've never
learning on the
thought of that,
ropes.
to be honest. Yeah,
Yeah, you learn on the rope. So it didn't keep it for long. Funny old game, Soon became an early appointment again. But I was the inaugural DE director, regimental signals officer, and I had a chap called Nick Fitzgerald who was my BC, and he said, "Oh, I've set up for you to go to the infantry RSO's course because infantry in those days had regular officers as RSOs." So
Yeah.
he said, "I've set up for you to go to the course there." And I spoke to a mate of mine from Sandhurst and said, "What's the score?" And he said, "You don't want to do this, mate. You run around Salisbury playing with a radio on your back. That's all you do. It's not really signals. It's just running around with a radio on your back. It's typical infantry approach to anything. So I chatted to someone else. In fact, I had a brilliant Smiz and a brilliant rear link sergeant. So in those days, the gunners had a Royal Signals rear link sergeant, and they were both, we were a little team, the three of us. And the rear link sergeant, I think, said, "You want to go to Blandford? They do a brilliant electronic warfare advisors course, all arms electronic warfare advisors course. You want to go and do that?" So I persuaded the BC to go and do that, and that was a brilliant course. Went to Blandford, learned all about. In order to do electronic warfare, you've got to know about VHF propagation and all that sort of stuff. So I actually learned a little bit about signaling properly, and learned a load of stuff about EW as well, which was really good. So that was really good. But I remember going down. We did the first big exercise with Stormer down in the Moselle. So you can imagine what the terrain's like and what the signalers will know what the VHF propagation is or isn't like down there. It was a blooming nightmare. And we used to keep losing call signs. So my job was to go out with either the Smiz or the rear link sergeant to go and sort them out. And it used to be great. I remember, it's just come back to me. Sergeant Turner was the rear link sergeant. He's brilliant. And I remember going out with him, and we'd get to the top of the valley, and you'd look down in the valley, and there'd be this little command post down there, right down in the valley. So little chance of getting any propagation. And then it would also have power lines over it and all this sort of stuff. So absolutely no comms recce done whatsoever. And Sergeant Turner would sort of brief me on all of this. He'd say, "Right, have a look at it, sir. So down in the valley, lots of high tension cables. It's probably not done a map or a comms recce or anything like that. Go and give the second Louis or the lieutenant a hard time, sir. And I'd pull up in the lander and I'd step out and just recount everything that Sergeant Turner just told me at the top of the valley, as if I was a complete expert on comms, and the poor old luckless lieutenant would get a complete bollocking for the RSO, who knew little more than he did, but I managed to bluff it,
Oh, you've got to be in it to bluff it, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, I've always enjoyed my relationship with junior and senior NCOs, and I'm a big believer, and as I progressed through the army, I was a big believer that officers are made by the junior and senior NCOs around them. There's no secret ingredient to it, really. The better the senior NCOs, the better the junior NCOs around that young officer, the better he or she will become. And the wise junior officers recognise that and learn and enjoy the company of the people around them. And those that don't, well, we all see where they go, don't we?
I mean, I totally agree with you, and I'm not in the, I'm not never gained the lofty heights of yourself or whatever like that. But I do remember in the command post. So I was on the guns, and then I went into signals and ended up on the CP. And you'd get the young second Louis and that coming in, and I must admit, in all my time, I've only had one young officer who wouldn't listen, and he thought he knew it all. And I think it was more personality than training.
Yeah.
And he's the only officer I ever seen sacked from the army. I think he got the captain. I think that what snapped the straw the camel's back was him one night in wanting to inspect the guard on horseback. So he went up the stables, got a horse, came back down in full blues, and we were like, one, he was late, so we were all stood like, what's going on? And then he comes up on a horse and inspected us from on top of a horse. And we were like, what the hell's going on? And it all turned out that his parents were up visiting. So he was kind of a strange bloke. But he disappeared shortly after that, never to come back again. So they're not all perfect.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there's you'll know there's a lot of, and most of the listeners will know, there's a lot of leg pulling about junior officers and the map reading and making mistakes doing this and
yeah,
making mistakes doing that, but I like to think that we talked about Sanders at the start, and the Sanders motto "Serve to Lead," and I think a lot of young officers are really genuine about that. They genuinely believe in the sort of ethos of serving to lead. Doing more for others than you do for yourself, and all that sort of idea. Um, and and the critical thing is whether they get pointed in the right direction. As they try to put that into practice.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I've we've all seen those that manage to do it and those that don't. But I do think a lot of it, there are like any A rank and any position, any walk of life. Actually, there's arrogant people and there's idiots and stuff like that. But I think a lot of it
yeah,
in the army is all about that those initial first years and having good senior NCOs and junior NCOs that not only work with you but guide you and educate you, and the wise officer listens to that and absorbs that and takes that with them.
yeah. I mean, there's trust as well. You've got to have trust in each other.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the young officer's got to has got to trust. Sometimes, like a lance jack sat in the back of the wagon, is
yeah,
this right? And he'll go, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And you you can't look down on him too much. It's got to go both ways as well. There's got to be
yeah,
trust there.
yeah.
But like I say, I mean, out
No,
of all my time,
absolutely.
I've only ever seen one officer that was service is no longer required. So Sandhurst
Yeah,
must be doing
yeah,
something right.
yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. But
So what
so
was
I mean,
after? You were
well,
captain at the captain at 12 Reg.
so I was captain 12, yeah, and then and after 19 regiment, and 19 regiment again was a
That was a
really
big
interesting.
change.
Yeah, it was a really interesting place to be in those days because it was the Air Mobile Regiment, and it was the supporting
Yeah,
the multinational division centre, nickname Fly Dig Die, because this idea that it'd all be helicopter based. You'd fly in, you'd create a wall or some sort of line, to prevent the Russians, and you'd probably get rolled over by their armour and that sort of stuff. But so it had a bit of a sort of
yeah,
it had quite a sort of fighting ethos as well. But it was a great place to go. I had been lined up to go and be adjutant at first, and I guess anyone who served with me knows that I'm quite a down to earth sort of bloke, really, and I was really keen to become a foo, and to get a bit muddy and dirty and that sort of stuff, and I didn't
yeah,
really want to go straight to be an adjutant, and I also liked the idea of 19 Regiment as well, and I remember the CO 12 Regiment getting me in. We were in Cyprus. I finished off with a Cyprus tour with 12 Regiment, and I remember the CEO getting me in Cyprus and saying, "Oh, Richard, I've got some great news for you. You're off to be adjutant at first RHA." And I remember saying, "That's not what I asked for, sir." And he said, "What did you ask for?" I said, I was going to be lined up to be a FOO at 19 Regiment with the possibility of becoming adjutant at 19 Regiment if the CEO liked what he saw, And I said, "That's what I want to do." And and the CO happened to know the guy who was doing the postings at Glasgow, and not very didn't have a very he had a very dim view of him. Let's put it that way. And he had me stood in the office while he phoned this guy up, and basically I watched my language a bit, but he basically said, Richard asked for this, you gave him that. You've always been an idiot, and you've been an idiot again. Now get it right. And lo and behold, the posting orders changed. And I was sent to 19 Regiment, which I was over the moon about. And uh, great place to learn to be a foo. Actually, in hindsight, it was absolutely the right thing because I found it quite challenging being an adjutant in a close support regiment in the field running the FDC, having been a foo.
yeah,
I think having gone to first with no field experience at all, to be running the FDC, the Fire Direction Centre, with no close support experience at all would have been a disaster, really. So I think it worked much better. I ended up with a brilliant BC who I bump into every now and then. He's around Salisbury, and he was an instructor in gunnery, and he recognised that it was a bit of a sort of training shortfall for me. And I remember we went out to um, uh, uh, to to Canada, and the BC was Chris Bradley, and he could see that I was struggling with sort of fire discipline because the way I viewed it in those days was I'd spent 6 years or so, never done any fire discipline, and to me, and I reflect on this, fire discipline is a bit like a language, and it's a bit like
Yeah.
speaking a foreign language, where if you're fluent in it, it just flows really easily. But if you're not, you have to sort of translate everything. So what I was trying to do was think, right, that's where I want the artillery rounds to land. So I've got to translate that into this foreign language called fire discipline to make that happen, rather than it just happening naturally. So everything I did was a bit slower and a bit more ponderous, and and he recognised that. And well, I remember one afternoon, sunny afternoon in Batters. It wasn't Batters, it was Wainwright, and we sat on this bank, and everybody else had knocked off. I don't know where everybody else had gone. All the rest of the TAC group had gone, and Chris just sat there with me with each of us with a pair of binoculars. He said, "Right, those are your arcs. Battery's yours. Do whatever you want. You've got as much ammunition as you want. You've got as long as you want. Just have a play. Put rounds where you want to put them, and just have a play." And he said, "If you're going to do some dangerous, I'll tell you. But this is all about getting your confidence and getting used to it." Brilliant instructor, awesome, and that nailed it for me. By the end of the afternoon, I was off, and I felt much more confident, much more able to do my job. And to me, that's another lesson about good people who take the time to mentor and to train and to help people. It's something I've tried to do, and I've tried to encourage others to do during my career in the army, because we've all experienced those people, those key instructor or mentor or just friend who've given you that helping hand that's just made such a difference. And so I spent a little bit of time as a FOO. Great job being a FOO in an air mobile battery, leaping in and out of helicopters all the time. You did a lot of the sort of fun stuff that people get to do in 7 Battery RHA or 2-9 Commander Regiment, but without having to do the hard slog of the course. So it was quite good fun, that. And then went on to be adjutant and ended up doing the third Cyprus tour of my career. So I've certainly had a few sunburns during my military career, especially with my hair colouring. And so I ended up being adjutant in Cyprus, and that was quite interesting because we took over from the RTR, and they'd had a horrendous morale situation. I think their regiment was being disbanded. Actually, it was one of the RTR regiments being disbanded, and they just went off on one. I mean, literally there was soldiers nicking cars in Nicosia and going ram raiding with them and all sorts of things. So when we came in, I arrived with the CO on the advance party, and the CO was summoned off to see the Commander of British Forces in Cyprus. And he came back and he looked absolutely ashen. And I said, "What's up, Colonel?" He said, "I haven't even got my regiment here yet, and I've had a bollocking already." And that sort of set the tone a bit for our and so you can imagine as the adjutant, I just spent it seemed like doing the whole 6 months just doing discipline, and in fact it got to quite a difficult position because the CO sort of was compelled to act on everything because Commander of British Forces was demanding that of him. And so and the RSM and I recognised that it wasn't that helpful for everyone to get sent back to UK or everyone to get disciplined. So we sort of managed things a bit ourselves, and quite often the RSM will walk into my office, which adjoined the COs. So we had to be careful what we say. And the RSM will walk in and say, "Have you got a moment for a coffee, adjutant?" I said, "Oh yeah, of course I have, RSM." And I'd go out and he'd brief me on some drama that had happened, and we'd come up with a way to fix it without it embarrassing the CO or causing a drama for the CO, or vice versa. I'd walk into his office and say, "RSM, you want to pop down for a coffee? I need to have a chat," and we'd sort things between us. So yeah, that sort of set the tone. But we did our training up in Scotland because we were trying to get the freedom of Inverness for the regiment, and someone had persuaded the CO that if he took the regiment up there, we'd get freedom of the city, and actually it worked actually. But the CO was a really good guy called Mike Ralph, said, "Well, we'll try and we'll train as we're going to fight, so to speak." So he said, "What we're going to do is we're going to give people freedom to go out into into Inverness, just as he will for Nicosia, and we'll trust them to behave themselves. So he said the first night, everybody goes out. We'll obviously have a regimental guard, but apart from that, everybody can go out. So they all went off into town. And the next morning, RSM and I got together, said, what was the damage? How did it go? RSM was looking a bit smug. He said, all the soldiers are back in, sir. And he said, load of subalterns weren't, sir. They're late in, and it's all clocked in the guard book or whatever. And I thought, this is a nightmare, and I was furious because I thought, flipping it, bloody officers' mess have let me down here. The regiment's performance. And now, I'm probably not naive enough to think that the guard bombardier was probably signing in all his mates late as well. But of course, Second Lieutenant Jones and Lieutenant Smith and whoever else, they were definitely getting held to account, and so I got all the junior officers in and said, you've completely let the side down. CA's furious. I'm furious. Your embarrassment on our regiment. And I said, if you're gonna embarrass the officers' mess so publicly, because the whole regiment knew about it, I said, you're going to be punished publicly. I said, so no more. There's no soldiers going to guard this camp for the rest of the week. This camp's going to be guarded by the officers' mess. You're going to form the regimental guard. You're going to guard the camp. So while the soldiers are having fun, you're going to be guarding the camp. Now, actually, there was also a little bit of method in my madness because I knew. Say again. There was a bit of method in my madness.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Well, there was method in my madness because I also knew that with the officers guarding the camp, the soldiers wouldn't take the risk and they get themselves back in as well. So I reckon we'd probably have a good discipline record for the rest of the week. So that's what we did. And I'll never forget, we had this dining room, the officers' mess, this dining room, these big bay windows in this sort of temporary mess in Inverness barracks. And I used to sit there having dinner with the CO and the BCs, and I look out the window, and it was in those days, again, IRA threats and stuff, so you had to have prowlers and all this sort of stuff. And I'd look out the window and see 3 or 4 officers prowling around with their SA-80s and their helmets on and all the rest of it, forming the regimental guard and glowering in at me at the adjutant sat at the table, but it sort of did a trick because we showed the regiment we weren't going to tolerate misbehaviour. We made sure they saw that there wasn't one rule for soldiers and one rule for officers. And I think by having officers on the front gate, it made sure all the soldiers came back in on time as well. So CO was happy that we had a fairly good record in Inverness, and as I say, we were on to get the freedom of Inverness, so that did the trick. But there's still a few individuals who probably never ever forgiven me for that.
Their fault. So after 19 Reg, you ready to go after that?
Yes, and then it was a bit of sort of staff stuff, as you do as an officer. You start getting into doing sort of staff jobs and stuff. And I again landed on my feet. I think I've always been fortunate. I've had some great opportunities, and I've also made my own luck as well, and sort of picked the jobs I wanted to do rather than perhaps the jobs you're supposed to do. Because as an officer, there's certain jobs you're supposed to do to get promotion and to progress, and then there's other jobs that are the more fun jobs. And again, I was given the choice either to go and do a job in the Army headquarters running commitments, so operations for the Army as a captain, or to go and do officer recruitment for the gunners. And again, the CO, Mike Rouse, said to me, these 2 choices, it's a no-brainer, Richie, you need to go to the Army headquarters and go and do commitments. That's where you get a promotion from and all this sort of stuff. And there was a chap called Roddy Lee, who some people might know, who went on to be regimental colonel as well. And he was doing that job, and I phoned him up. I said, what's it like? He said, God, don't do this job, mate. He said, it's absolute thrashing. Do not do this job. Whatever they offer, don't do this one. And so I thought, that's good enough for me then. So I went back to the CEO, said, I'll do the recruiting job. Sounds great. Colonel, he said, he said, that's ridiculous. That's career suicide. I said, well, I'll take my chance. I said, I've worked hard for you as an adjutant. I said, I'd got married as well while I was doing that. So I said, I don't mind a bit of time, a bit of that, enjoying life a little bit. And it paid me, it paid off. I had a great time. I started off as a captain in the first year, and then got promoted to major in the second year. But I was doing all this hosting potential officers visit to Lark Hill. I was going around visiting UOTCs. I had a whale of a time, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I remember in those days, they used to have what they called the DRA's conference, the Director of Royal Artillery's conference at Woolwich, because we were based at Woolwich. And we used to sort of help sort of provide the admin for it and stuff, our sort of recruitment teams and stuff. And I remember Mike Ralph, who was still CO in 19 Regiment, I think, at that stage. He came because all the COs got invited, all the brigadiers got invited, all the great and good from the gunners all came to this conference, the DRA's conference. And just at that point, I think I'd just picked up promotion to major and picked up to go to Staff College. And he came and he said, "I don't believe you, Colin. You must be the luckiest flipping bloke ever. You go and do the skiviest job going, and you still pick up promotion and get the Staff College." But again, I've mentored quite a lot of junior officers during my time, and I've always said, I think, sometimes it's as good to go and do the job you want to do as to go and do the job you're supposed to do, because if you're enjoying it, you'll naturally do well in it, and you'll probably promote well out of it, or certainly get good reports out of it. So, I'll stand by that. And there's particular times in my career where I can think, well, maybe it wasn't the right career choice to make, but actually, it's not done me any harm, and I've really enjoyed doing it as well. So I did that for a few years. That was great, and then went to Staff College and spent 2 years at Staff College. And from Staff College, I then went back to Germany and to NATO headquarters, the ARC, Allied Rapid Reaction Corps, and I was what was called Staff Officer Grade 2, so SO2 G2. So and G2 is intelligence. So I was the lead major in the intelligence branch of the ARC, and I loved that. That was a brilliant job. It was fascinating.
I bet
really,
that could
really,
have been. I bet that was interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it was. It was brilliant. And I worked to a British full colonel in corps, a British lieutenant colonel who was a infantier, and then there was a team of us. It was a real multinational team. So there was British major, a German major, Turkish major, and a Spanish major. And I was the lead because I was straight out of Staff College. I was a lead chief of staff type role as well for that branch, and I loved it. It was brilliant, and I learned a huge amount about a sphere of the army that I'd never known about. It later went on to give me other staff jobs in sort of intelligence and I-star sort of spheres and stuff. But it was great, and like all these things, I always chuckle how these sorts of things happen. So I'd only been literally in the job for about a week or so, and the full colonel, Inc. Corps full colonel, called me in and said, "Right, we've got a bit of a drama, Richard, because the Arcade Fusion, the big corps headquarters exercise, has got a Mesopotamia scenario. But," and he said, and this is it's not to leave the four walls of this room. It's a bit close to the bone because we're just getting ready to go and invade Iraq. That was going to be Telic 1. That would have been your Telic tour. He said, "We're about to go and invade Iraq." Yeah. So he said, "We can't really run an Arcade Fusion based on an Iraq scenario." He said, "So we're going to rerun the Arcade Fusion we did the year before, which is sort of Russian Germany based type scenario." He said, "But the Turkish officer wrote the scenario for Mesopotamia, and he did a reasonable job on it, but there's no way he's going to turn it around in 2 or 3 weeks. So you're straight out of Staff College, you're going to do that." And it was like, blimey, I don't know the first thing about intelligence. I don't really know about this scenario. I haven't served in this corps headquarters before, and suddenly I'm going to write the whole scenario that's going to drive the exercise. Like, blimey, here we go. And yeah, I had one of those moments. I think it was that Monday evening when the lieutenant colonel said, "I'll come and give you help because this is quite a tall order for you in your first week." And we were sat there sort of 7 p.m. in this lonely corps headquarters building, and my computer crashed. It properly crashed, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. And there was a helpline, NATO helpline, but of course that wasn't manned at 7 o'clock on a Friday evening, and I had to go through to I had my own office. The lieutenant colonel was next door. I had to go through to his office and said, "Colonel, I've got a bit of a problem. My computer's crashed. I can't get it to work again." I said, "So I think there's 2 options really. I think either you go home and I work at your computer, or and he just looked at me and said, or I do the bloody work, don't I? I said, I don't know what to say, Colonel. He said, and since you can't do the bloody work because you don't know what to do, looks like I'm doing the bloody work. Go on, off you go home, yeah, so he started the ball rolling. But actually, I mean, it was quite a few weeks of hard sweat to pull it out of the bag. But it was fascinating. I got introduced to a civilian. He was a civilian. He had served years in the Inca Corps, and he ran a thing called the UK National Intelligence Cell. And I suddenly got a call from this guy, Pete Modley he was called, and he said, I hear you're running the scenario for Arcade Fusion. I said, yeah. He said, you need to come down to the National Intelligence Cell and I'll have a chat. He said, because you're a gunner, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, there's a few things I need to tell you about intelligence that you've probably never heard before in your career, but you'll need to know it for running this exercise. And suddenly he sort of opened up this, well, I thought he'd opened up a sort of Pandora's box. One of the things you learn about in intelligence is there's a need to know basis. So he told me just enough that I need to know. And given that I was running an exercise, in hindsight, he didn't tell me a great deal. It seemed to me like he was opening up this Pandora's box. But in hindsight, he didn't really tell me that much. I later discovered that because there was a plan at one stage that the ARC was going to go to Iraq properly. And I was part of what was called the Forward Recon Liaison Team. So there was one intelligence guy, one logistics guy, one plans guy, and one signals guy, and we were on 24 hours notice to move for the Corps headquarters to go anywhere. And I was at work one day, went home for lunch because it was in Rheindaland, and of course it was just around the corner. Went home for lunch, came back, and there was an email on my machine saying the Forward Recon Liaison Group, FLRG, has been deployed. You're off to UK in a minibus at 1600 tonight. It's like, what happened to 24 hours notice? But I thought we were supposed to have 24 hours notice. That's a bit sharper than I was expecting. And I phoned up my wife and said, this is going to be a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, but I'm off to UK at 4:00 today. I said, that probably doesn't sound too bad, but the other bit of the jigsaw is from the UK, I'm probably going to fly to Iraq, and I'm probably going to be in Iraq for 6 months. And so she had about 2 hours notice to hear that I was about to go on a 6-month tour. So it was a bit of a crazy moment as the four of us, got propelled off to OPTAG in UK, started getting prepared to deploy. And this is partly when the sort of Pandora's box of intelligence opened up, and I started to get a real feel for what real intelligence was about and that sort of stuff. It was quite something. And actually, it was one of those classic things where there'd been a bit of a knee jerk. We all raced off to UK. There was the Black Watch. I don't know if you remember, there was a weird deployment of the Black Watch. They went sort of fairly north in Iraq, well out of the British area, with James Cowan as their CO, and he and all his people were there, also having had quite a short notice deployment, and they were also getting OPTAG'd, and we were all heading off to these quite unique things in Iraq. It was just when everything was starting to go a bit wrong, and the Brits were trying to get a grip of things. And anyway, we weren't there for long, and when people started to realise there were some pretty gaping holes in the plan, like we hadn't got any desert combats, like we hadn't got serviced respirators, like the list goes on, like we hadn't even got a change of clothes in most cases, all that sort of stuff, and so they brought us back to Rhine. We did OPTAG. They brought us back to Germany and said, right, we'll take you through a bit more training. We just need to sort of catch our breath a bit. It was good we got you raced off quickly, but we're just going to slow things down a bit and get going a bit more methodically. And I remember we were in the respiratory training centre, one of those weird tents that they set up in a classroom sort of thing. And I was in there with a respirator on. I looked through the sort of that plastic sort of screen. I thought, blimey, that looks like the Comarch. And, Comarch is a 4-star general, 4-star British general. It was General Dannett in the day before he became Chief of the General Staff. I thought, that looks like Comarch. And somebody said, you need to come out. General wants to chat with you, And we came out, there was the four of us there. And I've always loved General Dannett. I've got a lot of respect for him. He's a great bloke. And he came and basically said, guys, I know you've had a complete mess around. I know your families have been through a hell of a lot at really, really short notice, and it must have been really worrying for them and the rest of it. So that's why I've personally come down to tell you that we're not going to deploy just yet, and you can stand down and we'll let plans develop. I thought it was a mark of the man, and actually I then had
Yeah.
another encounter with him because they kept rolling on the plans, and there was a plan that we were going to deploy, and my bosses were all away, and we needed to brief up Comarc, and the role that I had as an all arms guy in the areas, I had specialist in core people and US intelligence people who were the proper analysts, and they do all the hard work, and I was like the salesman who went to brief their product, if you like. And anyway, we were told that Comarc wanted this brief, a sort of go no go brief, and my two bosses were away, so I was told, right, you're going to go and brief the Comarc. And I went down to his office. I went to his military assistant. The guy sits outside his office. Said, "Oh, Major Collinge, I've come down to brief the commander on the plans to go to Iraq." And he said, "Yeah, in you go." And he was sat at this really big table, like a sort of almost like a dining room table and stuff. But he was brilliant. He sort of pulled a chair out for me, and I was really nervous. I was a major about to brief a 4-star general on a deployment plan to Iraq. It doesn't get much more pressure than that. And he sat me down, and he put me so much at my ease, and it's something I always took away from that. And I thought, I think I gave a reasonable brief, and the reason I think I gave a reasonable brief is because he went to real lengths to put me at my ease, and he knew that the more he could relax me, the better brief he'd get from me. And it was, I think he was brilliant. He was brilliant in the way he did that. I've always had the really highest regard for him, and I've never forgotten the Incorps people that prepared me for success. Because one of the lines I said to him, I've never ever forgotten it. I said, "There's a plan that we might deploy to a city, which no one knows of at this time, but it's going to be very well known in years to come. And if we deploy our core headquarters there, we will probably regret it." The name of the city was a place called Fallujah, which no one had ever heard of in those days. But clearly, it wouldn't have been so great to put a core headquarters straight into Fallujah. And that was the brief I gave to the commander. And I always thought, wow, that's quite something. Yeah. And as it happened, the Corps didn't deploy. We didn't go to Fallujah. None of those things happened. Interesting times, really fascinating, interesting times,
I bet the Americans wish they'd had that briefing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It was big. There was, I don't think we were part of that sort of plan or that sort of stuff. But it's amazing times, really. And then from there, that's where I met you, Frankie. So next posting was to D Battery, the shiny D in 3 RHA. Probably
I bet that's a
the
shock.
best. Well, you guys, if you remember, you'd done Iraq, and then you'd just come back from Cyprus. New CO, I think 4 new BCs. I think I'm right in saying.
It was a big change around here.
Yeah, complete new head shed. So Ian Harrison came as a CO. Seb Heath came as C Battery. Seb Hines into headquarter battery, and Simon Culver into J Battery, and me to D Battery, and we were all brand new. Everybody was brand new in post, so it was quite a big turn up, certainly in that sort of top layer, And I love my time at D Battery. There's 3 things I've done in my career that really stand out. I love probably 4 really, because I really love my time in 50 Missile. Your first tour as an officer, that's really important. But then I did 3 things. So BCD Battery, CO at Pirbright, and Regimental Colonel during the tercentenary, the 300th anniversary, hosting the Queen at Larkhill and stuff like that. And people might think, well, that latter one was probably the thing that's the most important to you. Actually, the most important thing to me in my military career is Telic 7 and D Battery. And the reason it's the most important to me is because it's closest to why I joined the army, why I was passionate about my army career, and that principle of sort of serve to lead. And, as we went out to Telic 7 at that stage. Everything was starting to go wrong in Iraq. From what had been sort of quieter times, it was definitely getting more dangerous and more noisy.
Yeah.
Someone said to me at the time we arrived in Basra, it was the most dangerous city in the world. It subsequently went on to be more dangerous than it was when we were there, actually, in hindsight. People had tougher
Yeah.
tours than us. But we definitely arrived as the tours were getting more dangerous and more difficult.
I think
And
what for me, what opened my eyes to that tour was we'd only been there a matter of days, and the outgoing guys lost one of the sergeants to an
yeah,
IED. It was
yeah, you're right.
that was a big eye opener. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I remember. I remember hearing the blast. I remember the helicopters trying to medevac him and others out. Um, I can't remember everybody that was involved, but a name that always springs to mind is James Spelling. He was a second lieutenant in J Battery who was wounded as
Yeah.
well. Um, yeah, I mean that was my. I think that was my second night in Iraq. Um, yeah, that was quite something, and I had I made myself a promise that I was that we weren't going to shy away from danger, but I was going to do absolutely everything in my power to bring every man and woman back in one piece.
Yeah.
And of course, second night that happening suddenly made me realise as the BC how difficult it was going to be for me to keep my promise. And I remember I'd spoken to the wives club, I think, during training, and I had said to them, I said, look, at just the point when you want to spend time with your loved ones because they're going away for 6 months and you know you might not see them again, I'm going to take them away from you. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it's the best possible way that I can guarantee to try to bring them back to you at the end of the 6 months. And then we're going to train really hard and you're not going to see much of them. And I'm sort of unapologetic for that because that's the best way I can. That's what I can do to try to keep them alive and bring them back to you. You know, and I made myself that sort of promise that that's what we were going to do. And so that second or first night, that that really made me realise how difficult it was going to be. And I remember one of those real dilemmas because the plan was the first batch of D battery officers and soldiers we're going to take over vehicles and that night we're going to go out and get the next batch of people from the airfield. And my instinct was to lead it. I thought, this is a moment of leadership, where because I know everyone will be scared and I need to lead this patrol and take them and do it. And I can't remember who took me to one side. It might have been Pete Ackroyd. It might have been the BSM. I can't remember now who it was. But someone said, you can't do it. I know you want to do it, but you can't do it because those young officers and those sergeants and on occasions bombardiers have got to lead those patrols for the next 6 months. And you can't take them out every day and lead it for them. This is where they've got to do their job, and you have to do your job. And your job is to stand back for this one and let them go out and do it. And blimey, I found that incredibly hard. And I tossed and turned, trying to make a decision and trying to decide the right thing to do. In hindsight, I went with the advice I was given. Back to the sort of point we said earlier on about taking advice from people, and I got them all together, and I gave them, the sort of classic pep talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes in operational situations, being an officer is as much about theatre as anything else, and you have to, you've got to inspire confidence and things where sometimes you don't have it yourself, and it's all a bit of theatre. And I remember giving one of these classic sort of what I thought was one of these classic sort of rousing briefs, and I said, there's people out there who did this to us last night, and they're watching to see how we respond to it. Well, D battery flipping goes back hard at them, and we're going out there. And we're going to show them that it takes more than enemy action to put us off, and we're here to stay, and we're going to make our mark, and all the rest of it. All that sort of stuff. Probably didn't really believe a word of it myself, but I was just trying to inspire some confidence in people who were looking genuinely very scared in front of me. And anyway, as always, you can always rely on British troops to pull it out of the bag, and in situations like that. And they went off. They did the patrol. Great credit to those junior officers. Some of them, I think, were only second lieutenants who led those patrols, brought the battery, the rest of the battery back in, and with no incident and with no no difficulties, and I was immensely proud of them, and that sort of set the tone for the tour really. And we had our fair share of close shaves. Mr. Detroit, he had a patrol that was blown up. Blimey, I've never ever forgotten that. I was out on patrol myself. I heard the contact. I can't remember if you were, if it's why you were still there, Frankie, but
No, I'd left. I'd left.
I remember hearing the contact, and I remember I was on a patrol, and the guy who was leading the patrol, one of the lieutenants leading the patrol, said, should we race back in? I said, no, because we were doing vital point checks coming back into Basra Palace, and it was really difficult and dangerous ground through there, easy for it to trip out, to be caught out by an IED there unless you did the drill. So I said, no, we can't cut corners. That's how we'll lose more people. We do our proper VP drills and clear our way into Basra Palace. No matter how desperate I am to get in there and get in control and find out what's going on, we've got to get in there safely. So we took our time getting back into Basra Palace. I remember as soon as we got into Basra Palace, handing my weapon to someone on the patrol and saying, take my weapon, sort it out for me. I need to get into the ops room, racing into the ops room, finding out what was going on. Thankfully, no casualties. They eventually came back into camp. It's a mark of what a close shave it was, because I debriefed them, and they were sat in that, you'll remember it, that little sort of briefing room. I can't remember how many people were in the patrol, but I looked at this sea of faces, and genuinely, there was all these faces just covered in soot and dirt and black faces, from how close they'd been to the explosion. I was just like, bloody hell, we have had a hell of a close shave. And that wasn't the only close shave we had. We had moments of close shave, and moments of ironic comedy. I remember having a contact at the Iraqi camp. I forget what it was called now. Camp. It'll come back to me. But I think it was probably Cy Grigg who was there with me, and my role was to mentor the Iraqi army. And I remember I used to take off my body armor, and I used to. Sometimes I just have a radio that had a panic button off it and needed it, and sometimes I'd carry a weapon, a pistol, if I was a bit wary about the people I was meeting. But a lot of it was about building trust and building confidence. So I tried to show that I trusted and had confidence in them. So I'd leave all my gear in the snatch, and then the guys would create a cordon around the camp, and we got a contact, and I left the Iraqi brigade commander. I don't even remember saying anything to him. I think I just sprinted off and headed out towards the snatch. I'll never forget, I had quite a plump Iraqi interpreter with me as well, and we could hear these bullets flying around, and I wasn't hanging around. I just headed straight. I think it took me about 3 paces to go about 100 yards to 100 meters to the snatch, and this poor tubby Iraqi interpreter was miles behind. I wasn't even looking, and I remember the doors open, and there was a signaller in the back, and he passed me my body armor and my webbing and helmet and weapon. I stuffed the interpreter into the back of the snatch with the signaller, and then I sprinted off again across the compound. I remember there was like a fire escape, went up this fire escape, and there was like a flat roof with a little wall around the top of it, which is where the guys had gone to create a firing point to return fire towards where the enemy were firing from. And I remember Leopard calling across that roof and getting alongside. I'm pretty sure it's Cy Grigg. It may not have been him, but it was probably someone like him. And saying, what's going on? He gave me a quick brief. I said, right, I'll give the headquarters an update. And I remember sort of going to transmit on my radio, And what I hadn't realised is I've done so much running and so much leopard crawling with all my gear on and everything. I was panting away like anything, but I didn't realise that. And I went to transmit and just went like that. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and there were bullets. You could hear rounds going off around us. We were behind this little wall, and he just looked at me and I looked at him, and we just started laughing. And it's that some real dark army humour. And I've told civilians that story I don't know how many times, and they look at you in utter disbelief, and they can't quite believe that you could be in a contact and be laughing about it. But it's just that sort of classic army dark humour. He just looked at me, I looked at him, and we both just knew it was hilarious that I couldn't breathe enough to even transmit on the radio.
I didn't know nothing about that. I didn't know about the contact. So bloody hell.
Yeah. And the other guy who I've mentioned on Facebook and stuff sometimes is Gunnar Vakala.
Yeah.
And
Big
I
Dave.
owe him I owe him a big. Of course, he's not a gunner anymore, but he was in my day, and I am a big debt of gratitude because we were patrolling through Basra one day and we saw these guys in black suits with AKs. And we knew there was these sort of things called the death squads out. They killed 3 of my Iraqi interpreters while we were out there, which was very sad and in very horrific circumstances as well. You know, you could hear their families screaming down their mobile phone to me as they were dragged out of the house and stuff. Really, really, really unpleasant. But these death squads, which were being operated by the Iraqi police, were out and about. And we saw these guys in black suits and AKs around this petrol station. It was obviously what we would have called in the Northern Ireland days an illegal VCP. And it was obviously only allowing certain people to get fuel and stuff like that. But, you know, we had really poor intelligence in Iraq in those days in Basra. We didn't really know what was going on. I mean, we were quite exposed. We didn't have the sort of levels of intelligence that perhaps used to have in the days in Belfast and things like that. And but you know a bad thing when you see it, and it was definitely a bad thing. And my view was we couldn't turn a blind eye because we're British Army patrol, and you know we'd just lose all credibility if the others in the public and others saw us just drive past and ignore it. So I said, we need to go and fill their collar. And my Iraqi interpreter said, no, it's a really bad idea. They're bad people. Don't do it. And of course, you know, I'm afraid that's a bit of red rag to a bull to me. That meant I was definitely going to do it then because there's no way I'm going to turn a blind eye to it. And so we pulled out the trucks. I got out. I went and spoke to the guy who looked like the boss man of this thing. And we hadn't been talking very long. And he suddenly pulled up his AK and had it sort of pointing right at my forehead. I was thinking, this is not a great situation, this. And out of nowhere, Vac suddenly appears, and he had a machine gun, and it was almost like something like Crocodile Dundee or something. You know, that's not a knife. This is a knife type situation. You know, because over the corner of my shoulders, suddenly appears the barrel of this machine gun. I'm bloody glad he didn't fire it because I wouldn't be able to hear today. And this barrel up it, all I can hear is Vac says something like, you know, why don't you just F off? and there's a moment of, you know, where we just all look at each other and think, oh my God, how the hell is this going to work out now? You know? Anyway, he sort of lowers his weapon and backs off a bit. And so we sort of decide that discretion's the better part of valor. So we sort of make our way back to the truck as well and drive off. And interesting enough, we were heading to Camp Stephen. That was it. That's where the Iraqi army were based. A place called Camp Stephen. Headed to Camp Stephen, and I told the Iraqi brigadier what had happened, and he said, "You've had a close shave. That is definitely one of the death squads." And and they don't mess around. We wouldn't mess with them. So you guys have really gone into the lion's den, you know. But yeah, good old Gunnar Vakala, and you know, blimey. Back in the days in Hona, he used to appear in front of my desk a few times for the wrong reasons, having had a few nights out on the town in around Hona and stuff. But it always goes to show, you know, when the chips are down, people like him really deliver it. And he was spot on, and I've always had the highest regard for him. We still keep in touch on LinkedIn and stuff like that. And what a great bloke! It's amazing, you know.
He's just left the army, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. He's studying to become a lawyer. which is
Yeah,
awesome.
I was
Which
like,
is really,
yeah,
really,
I was
really
quite
awesome.
surprised. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was quite
yeah,
surprised when I found that out.
yeah. That's a
But yeah,
mark of the
good on
man. I
him.
mean, I'm delighted for him. That's absolutely brilliant, and
Yeah,
yeah, and I also, there's a couple of times where I've had conversation with people about racism, and I guess I've got to be careful what I say because there will be people who've suffered racism in the army, and there's no way I would condone that. But I also say to people, a lot of people in the army are genuinely colourblind, and there's a classic
yeah.
example of a Fijian soldier who puts himself in harm's way to protect his white officer, and I know without a shadow of doubt I would have done exactly the same for him, and to me, while there undoubtedly has been racism in the army, there probably still is some racism in the army. I'm a big believer that the vast majority of people I've served with and served alongside are colourblind, and it has no bearing whatsoever. And that example is a classic case.
I mean, I must admit, I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but I've never really, in all the time I was in, I never really seen racism. I've seen separation where people kept to the cliques, but there was no. It wasn't about racism. It was about cliques. That type of thing.
Yeah,
It wasn't.
yeah,
There was there might be some reverse racism, but I think that was just
yeah,
petty jealousy,
yeah,
really, on behalf where somebody, cried wolf and stuff like that. But I never really seen, and like you said, everyone was colorblind, really. Nobody.
yeah.
I just didn't. I didn't experience it. So when I
No,
see people who, call up about it and stuff like that, I kind of don't get their story sometimes
yeah,
because I
yeah,
just didn't experience it myself, and
yeah,
I was in various different regiments and never seen any of it really.
yeah. No, I agree, and I've never shied
So
away from it. So
after Iraq, how did it?
as an officer,
No, sorry.
yeah, I was going to say, as an officer who believes really strongly in values and standards and that sort of thing, I would never have shied away from it. If I'd seen it, I would have dealt with it, no doubt about it. And I've just
Yeah.
not really experienced it, which is, it's great. Um, yeah, so after Iraq, that was sort of end of my time. In fact, I got posted quickly after we arrived back in Iraq, slightly unceremoniously. So we arrived back. Seb Heath and I were both getting posted away from the regiment. CO Ian Harrison said, "How do you want to have a dinner night? Do you want to, farewell dinner night and that sort of stuff?" And he and I both said, "No, we'd just like to have a good old officers' mess smoker, lunchtime in combats, few beers. Don't worry about going back in the afternoon type thing." And that's what we did. And you and I were talking earlier on about when you've been doing this, the amount of emotions that pour out and stuff like that. And blimey, it was a proper decompression session. There was quite a bit of beer drunk. There was quite a lot of people who got quite mournful and reflective and that sort of stuff. And it was probably what was needed, to be honest. At the end of a difficult tour. But some subaltern had the wizzo idea that he got these mini motos and decided it was going to be a time trial on these mini motors quite a way into the afternoon after a few drinks. And I was pitched against Seb Heath. We headed off on the mini motos. I can't remember who was winning, who wasn't winning, whatever. Anyway, I'd never really one of these things in my flipping life. And they got a little stirrup, footrest things or whatever, and it was around a circuit, obviously. And my right hand, we were going clockwise. The right hand stirrup was caught into this playing field at the back of the officers' mess in Hona. And I tried to correct it, went the other way, and went onto my left arm. And anybody that knows anything about trauma injuries, classic injury of cyclists and motorcyclists, if you put your palm down, it goes up your arm and it fractures your collarbone, which is what I did.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite realise that at the time. But I couldn't understand why I couldn't pick up this mini moto and restart it. And one of my subalterns, I remember, came running out and said, "Come on, BC, you're letting the side down." He started up the bike for me. I carried on racing, now with a broken collarbone, but I didn't realise that. Didn't perform particularly well. C Battery on that day regrettably took the flipping honours. So I went off to literally lick my wounds and headed into the bar, got another pint, and the doc was there. And I said, "God, my shoulder's killing me. I've just come off that flipping mini motor. Shoulder's killing me." and I just thought I bruised it or something. Anyway, he had a look. He said, "You've broken your collarbone." He said, "You need to go A&E." And he said, "I'm not sober enough. Nobody else in this building sober enough to get you there." He said, "So we better call an ambulance." So next thing I know, this German Krankenwagen showed up, and and God, in perhaps a great way to leave a regiment, but also just oh, I can't even describe it. Basically, the officers went and got all the croquet mallets, and if you imagine a wedding with sort of swords held up and forming an arch, they formed an arch of croquet mallets for me to get into the back of this German ambulance. You can imagine, and I was in combats. So I was drunk, I was in combats, and all my other drunk mates have just created this honour guard for me to get into the back of the ambulance. So you can imagine how sympathetic the German ambulance crew were. Not very. And I was taken to Hanover, and it was the World Cup. I remember it was the World Cup, and I think the World Cup was happening in Germany, and the Germans were getting really excited about the matches happening everywhere. So I then arrived in a German A&E, dressed in combats, looking drunk, to be surrounded by loads of German football fans who've also managed to hurt themselves one way or another. And although the A&E staff haven't got much tolerance for the German football fans, they've got even less tolerance for a British soldier in combats. So I went right to the back of the queue. So NHS waiting lists. You think they're bad nowadays. It was nothing on that day. And eventually, I ended up in a two-person ward with this German chap. And they didn't even take the combats off. It didn't do anything. I just literally flopped on the bed, still had my boots on and everything, feeling pretty sorry for myself. Didn't give me any pain relief because I was drunk, or I wasn't drunk by that stage. I think I'd sobered up quite a bit. But yeah, they didn't give me any pain relief. Eventually, this German chap who couldn't get out of bed said, come over here. And I went over. And he undid my boots for me. The nurses hadn't done anything. He undid my boots for me. I managed to get my boots off and crash onto the bed. And we built quite a friendship because he could do things with his, he could undo boots and things like that for me. And he couldn't get out of bed, so I could adjust the curtains and stuff for him, So we sort of helped each other out, right? And eventually, the next day, there was this, he was bollocking one of the nurses, properly bollocking one of the nurses. What the hell's going on here? Anyway, next thing I know, a drip suddenly appeared. And he says, yes, I'm giving them a hard time. You've been in here for 12 hours. You've had no food, no drink, no pain relief. It's outrageous. I've told them, So he was really kind. He got me squared away with a drip and a bit more medical treatment and stuff by giving them a bollocking. Quite a way to leave the regiment. And I was due to go and be the Brigade Major Royal Artillery, so the Chief of Staff of the Divisional Artillery Group, in 3Div with Brigadier Nick Eales as the CRA. And from my hospital bed, I was due to go, I think I was leaving on the Friday, driving over the weekend, and due to go on exercise as the BMRA on the Monday. So you can imagine, I had to phone up the Brigadier at home at the weekend and say, the Chief of Staff you thought you were getting on Monday isn't going to arrive for another month. So that sort of went down like a lead balloon, really, as well. So it wasn't, always round. It was a very memorable, but perhaps not the best way to leave a regiment. And Ian Harrison, the CO, was slightly nervous as well because I think the CO had a chat to, not CO, the QM had obviously had a chat to him about health and safety and liability and responsibilities and all that sort of stuff. And so we had a conversation when he came racing around to the hospital one day and said, everything all right, Richard? We don't have to take this any further, do we? Of course, there was no way I was going to do that. I said, no, it's fine. Honestly, it's fine. And then there was also amusing when I eventually got to Bulford because I suddenly had all the jungle drums had been beating all around the gunners, and I had all these people phoning me up saying, "Oh, mate, are you in a motorbike accident? Are you all right? You're all right." I was like, it wasn't quite a motorbike, but I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
It'd be quite embarrassing to admit it was one of the little Motor G things.
Well, yeah. Totally. And
I just let them think, it's a motorbike.
Yeah,
Superbikes, that's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On the German Autobahn, I was doing a ton. Lucky to be alive, if only. Yeah. So I did a couple of years.
So you would. Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say the next thing I did was a few years in 3 Div as Brigade Major Royal Artillery, and then picked up promotion, half colonel, went over to the Army headquarters, which was then in Wilton, but was preparing to move to Andover, and I was on the change management team, working with another gunner called Giles Vosper Brown, who was a full colonel then, and we were basically the team that moved the Army headquarters from Wilton to Andover and did all the change management as part of that as well. So some really interesting stuff we're doing. Things like, the Army headquarters is open plan. Back in the day in Wilton, it wasn't. So everybody had their own offices. So we had to get everybody used to the idea that they weren't going to have their own office. They were going to have an open plan, including brigadiers, and the only people that get an office would be a general, and briefing that to full colonels, brigadiers, people like it went down like a lead balloon, you can imagine, so there's quite a lot of change management and cultural stuff we had to do to get everybody used to this idea of moving to Andover and trying to sort of develop new ways of working and make us more efficient and more effective as part of this initiative and that sort of stuff. So that was again another really interesting thing, something I'd never done before. So the brigade major bit at 3Div built on being a BC. It was gunnery stuff and all that sort of stuff, planning gunnery and everything else. But this change management stuff in the Army headquarters was something completely different. I've never worked in the Army headquarters. I've never done change management. I learned a lot about change management. That was another fascinating tour. And then from there, next stage was Pirbright.
I was going to say then it was on Pirbright. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue at Pirbright, which was, again, one of the things that I hold up as being one of the best things in my career. The great thing about Pirbright is, I talked about earlier about the young men and women and, thousands of soldiers under training were passing through Pirbright in the years I was there. So it's a great honour to be part of the first part of their career. But the other thing about Pirbright is you get all the best junior NCOs from all the cap badges. And wow, what an amazing bunch of people to command. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We had some pretty tall orders to improve pass rates, but not reduce our standards. And all those sorts of things were being placed upon us, and we instigated a sort of a continuous improvement strategy that took off just like a snowballed. I was so impressed with all the junior NCOs in particular who really bought into it and really bought into this idea of identifying how to make improvements at their level, and me and others empowering them to do them, and they responded well to that. We rewarded and recognised people who built into that. It became a bit of a snowball effect. Everybody was getting involved with it. We got to a stage where for the 2IC, the RSM and I, the hardest thing we had was not trying to encourage people to take on this ethos, but actually the hardest thing was trying to manage all the good ideas that were being thrown our way. It was brilliant to see. It was fascinating. It was great. It really, really rewarding to be at the helm of that. So I had a fantastic few years there. Some great sub-unit commanders as well. Again, from a spectrum across the army. Paul Tully, LE Para 7 Para RHA gunner. BC was a name that gunners listening will know. But I had I had a nurse at one stage. I had a vet at one stage. I had a logistician. I had AGC company commanders. Brilliant to work with these different people. At one stage, my command group had Paul Tully as an LE male LE major, and then 3 female sub-unit commanders. And they'd all pick on him, which is quite funny. The females picking on the left of the LEBC, around the table, and there's me at the top of the table, just marveling at this sight of equality, actually, because it was unheard of. Well, not unheard of, but it was pretty unique in those days. It was just great to be at the helm of it, and this unique setting with really capable and passionate people, and a really important role to set the tone for the future of the British Army with the recruits we were putting in, who had to be at the right standard. We were really insistent we had to deliver people at the very right standard, and a huge emphasis on values and standards as well. I can remember failing someone at, I think, at week 11 of the 12-week course because they'd thieved in their barrack block. and and I said, no, I'm not having someone like that in the British Army. If they haven't learnt now the importance of our values and standards at week 11, they're not going into the British Army. And I got all sorts of grief from their mum and dad because they booked tickets to come down and stay near the Pirbright, and they booked train tickets and all the rest. And I got all these heated phone calls saying it's outrageous, and can't you just let him slip through? And he only nicked a little thing and all this sort of stuff. And I said, no, 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 no. We've got standards and we're not letting them slip. And that's that. I don't care if it's, week 11 and he's just about there. He should have known better. In fact, I'd have been more forgiving if it was week 2, week 3, but week 11, there's no excuse. So,
No,
fascinating time.
totally agree. I mean, going back to something you mentioned earlier about your time there, and I had never given it much thought really about what you said, and I'll give much thought before. Sorry, what you said that these guys, lads and lasses who were joining the army, knew they were joining up to go to Afghan, more or less. So
Yeah.
it does take a certain amount of balls to do that as well, really.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm
Yeah.
not going to compare it to signing up for the First World War or volunteering for the Second World War, but
Yeah.
they were still volunteering. Our army is made up of volunteers, not conscription.
Yeah.
We are different to a
Yeah.
lot of armies in the world, and that's why we're
No, it's
better.
true.
And
And there's some,
these recruits have volunteered, and they deserve respect for that.
yeah. And you get some amazing things. The thing that really touched me, probably my whole time being CO there, we had an individual came who'd had a really unpleasant backstory, family backstory, gang raped by her own family, and all sorts of horrendous stuff. And she ended up in the British Army, and obviously was suffering, as a result of that, and was crying a lot at night and things, and this was disturbing the people in her barrack block. And of course, you can imagine that heated environment of phase 1 training, tolerance levels are pretty low, and so initially people, her team turned against her, and I had a really gifted female welfare officer who clocked what was going on, and she came out and chat to me. And so we came up with this plan that we'd get the welfare officer to speak to the girls in this room and explain the situation with the consent of this other girl, and explain the situation. And of course, as soon as they understood what it was all about, they couldn't be more empathetic and supportive of her. And it was a real success story because they really rallied around and supported her through the training. And I've never forgotten. We were doing the pass-off parade, and I clocked her. I'd obviously through the welfare committees and stuff, I'd taken quite an interest in how she progressed through the course, and I clocked her on the parade. And of course, most people on the parade are there with families and friends that'll be all up in the grandstand. And of course, I went over to her and I said, I don't suppose you've got anybody here supporting you in your pass-off parade, have you? She said, no, I haven't. I said, but the great thing is you've now got another family, and they're all around you. It's the British Army, and we're your family now. And she started to well up, and I started to well up, and it was like, yeah, this is awesome. This is when the British Army makes you so proud that you do things like that for people, and it's it was immense. It was just really great. And I loved being CO. That some another one that made me chuckle as I was thinking about. There was a lad who on the pass-off parade, who was, as I walked past him, he was absolutely, all the blood had drained from his face. He was literally just about to pile in. And I took one look at this and thought, blimey, I'm not having him pile in front of his family on his big day and all the rest of it. The thing is with soldiers in training, of course, the corporal, the bombardier, the sergeant, they're gods in their world. This bloke called the CO, don't know who he is. He's obviously quite important, but I don't really know who he is or what he does. Of course, I pitch up, and I saw him about to keel in. And I said, right, I want you to follow me. And we were literally on the parade with hundreds of people watching it, and I was in all my blues and sword and all that. So I want you to follow me. And he just looked at me in disbelief, thinking, I'm not following you. The flipping bombardier and the corporal didn't tell me to follow you. There's no way on earth I'm going to do what you tell me to do. So I had to sort of persuade him that, it was the right thing to do. I said, just follow me. You're going to be fine. I'm going to look after you. I promise you. Just follow me. And I literally, while the inspecting officer and the RSM were going around the ranks, I just took him off for a bimble and we went walking around the parade ground. And of course, what he didn't understand is when the CO does that, everybody watching just thinks it's all part of the parade. It must be part of the parade. I say, why else would this happen? So I just wandered off looking confident as anything with this young soldier following me. And we went trotting around a few of the ranks and stuff. And then eventually wheeled back round, got back to his spot, slotted him in. I said, there you go. You're okay now. You're not going to faint. You're going to be fine. You're going to enjoy your parade. And your mum and dad are going to be really proud of you. So enjoy yourself. Good luck. And left him to it. And, that's the great thing about being a CO, because you can just do crazy things like that and get away with it. It's brilliant.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I remember the CO, the RSM brother, looking over his shoulder at me. I could just see that look in his eyes, thinking, oh, bloody hell, the CO's off doing a wild one again, isn't
he? So what was after Pirbright for you then?
Yeah, so Pirbright, back to the Army headquarters. And that's what I started to build on, that sort of intelligence work I'd done before. So I became what was then called the SO1 I-Star strategy. I was working for another gunner, as it happened, someone you'll know, Dinger Bell, who was then a full colonel, right. Ian Bell, Dinger Bell. And he was the assistant director of I-Star. And I was his lieutenant colonel. And that was great. That was a couple of years of trying to do all the work that was required for intelligence and I-Star in support of Afghanistan and Iraq as well. I think Iraq might have finished by then, but certainly Afghanistan. Trying to get lots of new equipment into theatre, lots of training of new intelligence and I-Star teams deploying into theatre. And I was also the lead for what was called Attack the Network. So people might remember the approach to dealing with the IED threat, which was immense at that stage, was threefold. So it was attack the network, prepare the force, and defeat the device. So defeat the device was all what the ATOs and sappers did. That was about, when you find a device, diffusing it and that sort of stuff. Prepare the forces, all about the training you did beforehand. So all of the various bits of training that people got given in order to look for and to identify and how to respond to IEDs. And then attack the network was the intelligence bit, which was fascinating. It was all about getting after the terrorists and exploiting the various bits of information and intelligence. And I was the lead for the material and personal exploitation, which one of the intelligence battalions did. It was a new way of doing business. It's no different really to what the police would do on any sort of police program. So it's interrogating a suspect. At the same time, you do deep analysis on the materiel, whether that's their mobile phone or remnants of a device or pieces of components of a device or whatever it may be, documents, anything like that, to link the two together. So what the person being interrogated says, either exposes a bit more about the material you got or what you find on the material exposes a bit more about the person. But it's just bringing those two things together. And the Army had never really done that. They'd done it in Northern Ireland a bit, but they'd never really done. So we created that new capability. And that was fascinating. I really enjoyed doing that. It was really good. Did a lot of work with the Americans. There was a big organisation called JIDO over in the States. I flew over the States a lot. We were doing a lot of work with the Americans, sharing knowledge on how to do it, and with the other partners as well. Five Eyes partners and stuff like that. So fascinating. Really love that. Felt really, really worthwhile. As sometimes people say that when you leave command, you get sort of post-command blues because you go from being a CO where click your fingers and anything happens around you. Suddenly you're back into the Army headquarters and you make your own cups of tea and you just dog's body like everybody else. But it felt really rewarding and I really enjoyed it. It was great. It was a great couple of years. And then after that, I got a call from the gunners actually up at Glasgow saying we're looking for someone to be the next Regimental Colonel, and it hadn't really been on my radar at all. And decided what I was going to do. I just picked up promotion. I was sort of thinking what I was going to do as a full colonel, and somebody said, "Would you like to be a regimental colonel?" I'd never even thought about it. And then almost in the same conversation, they said, "Yeah, and you realise it's going to be quite a big gig because this was just before 2016, so 300 years anniversary of the Gunners." And I thought, it's a no-brainer. Actually, this is an absolute no-brainer. Come on, this is writing your name into history. I'm going to be at the helm of the Gunners as they celebrate the 300th anniversary. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. So I went off to Larkhill, became regimental colonel. Had the most amazing time. It was hard work. It was regimental colonel's one of those jobs where you've only got a very small team around you, and you get a huge amount of demands put on you, none of which you can prioritise. So you work for you have a chain of command, which was in those days was a 3-star para general. So obviously, what he says goes. You've got to do what he says. But the master gunner is also your unofficial boss, and General Granville Chapman, for those that know him, you do what he says. So you're doing that as well. Then you're working for all the serving and retired generals and brigadiers and others of the gunners. You sort of do what they say. You try to support the COs and the RSMs, so you've got to prioritise them, and you've got to help them out and make sure that they're able to do their jobs. And then also you've got a whole myriad of veterans, and former Gunner Jones, who's now 90, living in Kent or something, who's having a drama. Of course, he's top of the list as well. So there's no. It was really hard to prioritise in those jobs. I used to work really, really late at night because I just look at all of these jobs coming in and think, well, I can't prioritise any of them. They're all important. They all need doing, and I've just got to smash through them. So it was a busy job, but wow, what an amazing job! I was so fortunate to be doing it in that time. I mean, I did things that literally money cannot buy. Obviously, the cherry on the cake was the actual birthday at Larkhill, hosting Imagine the Queen for a whole day, which was just mind blowing. What an amazing lady! Absolutely amazing. She would ask questions of soldiers and ask questions of generals and everyone in between. And the thing I thought was just so remarkable about her was that she would ask a question, and it didn't matter what your rank or experience, you would feel like you were being asked a proper question. But it was just challenging enough that she also knew you'd be able to answer it, so you wouldn't be embarrassed. And it was a wonder to behold her in action. I mean, she was absolutely amazing, and for her age, I mean, she just walked around. It was a hot day, and she just seemed to keep going and going. And God, it was just amazing. But then, that's obviously the icing on the cake. But then we were invited to Parliament with the RA band to have a reception on the jetty bit outside Parliament by the Thames with the RA band playing one evening. We went up to Edinburgh Castle. We had a dinner night in Edinburgh Castle with the pipes and drums playing at Edinburgh Castle. God, the list just goes on. I mean, there were so many things that I did, and were just amazing. And that was just the things that were to do with the RA300. So I also was around for the anniversary of the Somme, which was amazing, and a whole load of other those First World War anniversaries that also cropped up at the same time. So I had 2 years of just amazing stuff, hard work, but gosh, memories for life, and some really, really amazing things, and meeting some brilliant people. I mean, just the privilege of going around to regiments again when you've handing over command, and I knew I was never going to be a brigade commander or higher. So regimental colonel's the nearest thing you get to being back in command and going around regiments and meeting young soldiers and engaging with them, which was a real privilege. And the veterans, I mean, I used to do quite a lot of veterans events, whether it was at Chelsea Hospital or at the RA Assembly up in Blackpool. I used to love it. It's been great meeting all these veterans and chatting to them, and hearing all their stories. Brilliant. I absolutely loved it. An amazing job to do. Huge privilege to do it. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I bet your liver was glad when you stopped doing it.
Yeah. There was a I particularly enjoyed Blackpool because there was quite a back to that point about 50 missile and the Esprit de Corps. There was quite a 50 missile posse that used to go to Blackpool, and I was I'd always end up with them, and yeah, we had some really good nights putting the world to rights and telling various different generations tales of their lives in 50 missile. It was yeah, it was brilliant actually, really
Yeah, I
really
can
great.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was after that then?
And then after that, the final job in the army, which I extended it. So I did 5 years as what was called in those days assistant head of information exploitation, which sounds a bit long winded, but basically I was doing interoperability for the British Army with predominantly the Americans, the French, the Germans, and the Danes, but also wider NATO and Aussies and stuff like that. But those three countries in particular. So I spent a lot of time flying to the States, visiting France, visiting Germany, visiting Denmark, and basically our digital transformation strategy, making sure that was aligned to those key allies, and that everything that they were doing, we were doing, because they were also changing at the same time, was aligned and that were synchronized. And you were saying to me earlier that you're in the IT world now, so you'll understand the importance and also the difficulty of aligning data and
Yeah.
data standards and all that sort of, and that's what we're doing. I hasten to add, I was sort of the diplomat, so I had a whole posse of Royal Signals people in the Director of Information, the Army headquarters, who were experts at all the technical stuff. I was more the salesman again, getting out there and doing the sort of diplomacy bit. But I loved it, and I had again something I've always enjoyed during my career is, and I've tried to emulate it with the people I commanded, was being trusted and empowered. And I had a couple of generals who were both brilliant, and I would head off to the States on their behalf. I'd be meeting American 3 and 2 star generals, and I'll be making agreements on behalf of the British Army and British government, without any need to check with anyone. The French, the Germans, and the Americans I worked with could not believe it, because for each, I was a full colonel. Any of the full colonels at their level, they couldn't sign up to anything, whereas I was agreeing to this, that, and all sorts. And I'd come back and I'd bump into my general, and he'd say, "How'd it go in the States?" Which I was, "Oh yeah, I've agreed this, great, yeah, brilliant, great job, yeah, keep doing the great stuff you're doing, Richard." It's great to be trusted and just allowed to get on and do stuff like that. And I really, it was a great way to finish my time in the army. I got on, sort of. I think you don't get on first name terms with an American 3 star general. They know your first name. You definitely don't call them by their first name. But
Yeah.
that sort of, there was a the head of U.S. American intelligence, and I went to a final meeting in the States with with the British 2 star with my general. And halfway through the meeting, she says, "Right, I've got so much more important to do. I need to give you this, Richard." She gave me a sort of handwritten note that I've now framed, in my downstairs loo, like all these things, where all these things go, wishing me all the best for retirement, and how much I've done to help US UK special relationship and all this sort of stuff. Really, really nice, lovely way to finish my career, to be honest.
And during this time, you were actually volunteering for ambulance crews as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, so of course, like everyone, I also had my pandemic experience, and we, not unsurprisingly, all of that sort of foreign travel I've described, came to a grinding halt pretty quickly as the pandemic hit. And I have done now 15 years as a volunteer with the Southwest Ambulance Service. By that stage, I've probably done about sort of 10 or so years, uh, and there were obviously the health service was creaking. The ambulance services came to the army headquarters and asked for support, but the army couldn't provide any combat medical technicians to go on ambulances, because they were being held to either go to the Nightingales or to go out to foreign garrisons if they've been hit badly with infections. So there was a chap called Jim Allen, who's a gunner officer, and his wife Emma Allen, who were running. They were working with South Central Ambulance Service, doing military co-responding. They'd done that as volunteers for a few years on the, and they'd been to the Army headquarters and seen a sort of marked up car in the Army headquarters. They do that as volunteers. They go out on a car. They're trained up as blue light drivers, and they go out responding on that. The model I was used to was slightly different. It's volunteering in your own car, so you drive at normal road speeds, but again, you've got the same clinical skills. You try to get to the scene before an ambulance and provide life-saving support and that sort of thing. And we realised, the three of us realised there was an opportunity here, because there was all these volunteers across the UK, military people who in their own time volunteered doing this stuff, who could probably be brought together to create a team to fill the need that the ambulance service had. And we started to propose this to the South Central Ambulance Service and to Army headquarters. And it was quite unique, because it took a long time, not a long time, but comparatively long time for people to get their head around this, because ordinarily, when you do what's MACA task, military aid to the civil authorities, it's taking military skills and using them to support the civil authorities. And so, if you need tanker drivers, you go to the RLC and get a load of tanker drivers. If you need, people to fill sandbags, you go and find a unit and they go fill sandbags to do flood protection or whatever. Those sorts of things. The Army's pretty comfortable with doing that. They do a lot. But the idea of taking a bunch of service people, and I say service people, it wasn't just Army, it was Navy and RAF as well, taking service people and using their hobby effectively to do a military task was like the computer couldn't really work out how that was supposed to happen. It was quite different. But we managed to persuade everyone that it was a good thing to do. And actually, what was most on the minds of the Army headquarters and Joint Command was the risk, whether it's infection risk or whether it was clinical risk and driving risk. And actually, because I'd spent so long with the ambulance service, I was able to sort of reassure a lot of senior commanders, say, look, there won't be a risk, because actually the ambulance service does this day in, day out. These are risks that they have all the time, whether it's infection, whether it's appropriately treating a patient, or whether it's driving safely. These are things that they manage daily, so it's not a problem for them. They'll be all over this. So we did those that need it, and I was one of them. Were given a month-long blue light driving course. That was I'm not being funny. It was great fun. It's a great, in your 50s to be given the chance to do a month-long driving course. First of all, it's just a great life skill. Having learned to drive at 17, I learned a hell of a lot about my driving, and certainly improved my driving. You spend 3 weeks literally driving, just doing normal driving. You don't get anywhere near blue lights and sirens until the last week. And I remember the first day, I got into this transit van thing, and he said it was me and two others. I think it was a Navy diver and a sapper, I think, if I remember off the top of my head. And we were paired up onto this truck with an instructor, and it was bizarre, because we were having to go to the driving school and everything with all the roads closed. I mean, I was driving down the 303 and up the A34 to Abingdon with absolutely nothing on the road. So it was literally just a free run all the way down. It was amazing, because it was in proper lockdown and stuff. And we got into this truck, and he said, right, who wants to go first? And I sort of said, I'll go first. And I drove down the road. I was doing all my stuff that I seem to remember, your 10 to 2 and all that sort of stuff, and trying to change gear really well. I thought, yeah, not bad, that. Did all right there. And of course, it puts him up, pull over, and he got his notebook out, and he must have turned over about flipping 5 to 10 pages of notes. That was a start of, oh right, I've got a bit to learn, haven't I? And so you spent 3 weeks doing that, and then a week on blue lights. And that was amazing. That was great. That was quite something. Part of the challenge though was that the roads were quite empty, so they took us down to Brighton and all sorts of places to try and find some traffic for us to have a bit of challenge in the traffic. So we did the training, and then we deployed on Op Rescript, as it was called. I went to Didcot Ambulance Station along with 9 other military responders, and we just did full-time shifts, and we effectively would be paired up with a paramedic on a shift, do a 12-hour shift, days, nights, and a few days off, and then days, nights, a few days off, and did that from sort of July through to, I think it was through sort of, I'm trying to remember what we did now, May through to July, the first bit of the pandemic. Then we stood down, then we stood up again in that really bad winter before people had been properly vaccinated, and there was a lot of deaths, and it was bleak. And then the following winter we went back out again. So we did a total of 9 months on the road. The
Wow.
first stint was all quite exciting. The ambulance crews were really up for it. That, for them it was like, wow, a bit like us going on a military tour. They were sort of thinking, yeah, this is great. This is the biggie. This is the one we trained for. It was all quite exciting for everyone, and people didn't really know the risks either. We were doing all sorts of things like driving trucks without face masks on, which later on we'd be all wearing face masks when we were driving the trucks and all that sort of stuff. When we went back in the winter, it was very different. The ambulance crews had been thrashed. They were absolutely exhausted. They'd seen more horrendous situations than anybody would want to look at. And part of our job, as I said to the teams we took in, part of our job is to boost morale as much as actually do the job. But we would drive and treat. So the way it was done was that we'd go out on a job. We would more often not drive to the job on blues, get to the job, assist the paramedic in treating the patients, and then generally the paramedic would treat in the back of the ambulance as you drive back in. One of the things you learn about doing that is that all that ambulances go to most calls on blue lights. So if you see an ambulance with 2 people up at the front, they're on the way to a job. Very few times do they leave a job going to hospital on blues. So you'll often see an ambulance with just 1 person sat in the front, and that means there's somebody in the back treating. But most jobs, you stabilise the patient on scene, and then you just convey them at normal road speed into the hospital. You do a thing called a pre-alert, which is, as it says on the tin, the paramedic calls up the hospital, says they're bringing a serious patient, and then if you're on a pre-alert, then you go in on blues, and that's really taxing driving, actually, amazingly so, because you've got a paramedic who's stood up in the back of the ambulance, probably trying to give drugs through an injection and things like that, doing some quite delicate work with a patient, and you're trying to drive fast, but at the same time, if you put on the brakes, the paramedic stood up, he or she's going to go absolutely flying. You don't know what you're going to do to your patient either. So it's really challenging driving, and you're trying to read ahead of the road really, really far ahead, and try to predict everything. And it's it's amazing how much pressure you're under driving on blues in those sorts of conditions. Very different than driving to the job, because driving to the job is just a bit of fun, really. You put the blues on and you blast through the traffic, and you're both strapped in, and you swing the truck around a bit, and it's almost a bit of fun. Whereas on the way back, when you're doing a pre-alert, that's a different story altogether. So but it was fascinating time. I loved it. It was ambulance service was just like the military. It was just like being on a QRF. Same sort of dark humour, and that's how they get through the day. And it's back-to-back jobs. You get a 30-minute meal break, but apart from that, you are on the road and on jobs all the time. Invariably, you're overrun, because if you get a job just before the end of your shift, then from where we were in Didcot, it'd probably take you 20 minutes to get to a job, 20 minutes to half an hour on scene, and then most of our patients were conveyed to John Radcliffe Hospital, so that's a good 30-minute or so journey up to John Radcliffe. Then you're doing the handover of the patient, then you get the truck back down to Didcot. So not uncommon to have a 2-hour overrun on a 12-hour shift, and quite often I was trying to commute back and forth in Wiltshire as well, so pretty long days, pretty tiring, but very rewarding. It's great to be able to do something in the pandemic, to do something constructive. Some great moments of humour, some great moments of success, and some really sad stuff, really, really sad. Some of the care home stuff was horrible. We'd go to care homes. I remember going to a care home with all these families looking through the windows to pick up a patient, and they'd see us pull up and they'd see us go in with our stretcher, and of course they're all worried to wonder whether it's their relative that's coming out on the stretcher. And lots of the COVID people we took into hospital, you were pretty certain they weren't coming back out. I remember one job where we took someone downstairs, got them into the ambulance, and the relative was on the street. We weren't allowed to take them to hospital with us in the ambulance because of all the COVID regulations. As I looked at this person as we got into the ambulance, I thought, I'm not sure this person's going to see that relative ever again. Really, really sad. So, some great stuff, but some rubbish stuff. Like so many things in life, a bit like life in the army. Really, amazing stuff
Yeah.
blended with some rubbish stuff. And that was definitely the theme of it. But it was a great privilege to do it, and I loved it, and it was great. And when else do you get an experience in life where you get to do somebody else's job, but still be doing your own job, and you never get to do that. It was a great chance to try a different job. And of course, because I volunteered as an ambulance responder, to actually learn to blue light drive and to be actually on the ambulances and do the job properly was, I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating. It was really great experience. And again, doing it on a army salary, so full colonel salary. So I had a couple of times when paramedic would be saying to me on an overrun, say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, mate, you're not getting overtime, are you?" And I turned to him and say, "You don't want to know how much I've just been paid to drive you around for the day." Yeah,
Fair enough. I mean, I've got to take my hat off to you for that. To volunteer for it and actually do it. It's not something everyone would do.
yeah, it's I love it. I mean, I do it even
It's
now.
amazing.
I was out at Call even last night. I do it most evenings. I haven't done tonight, Frankie, because I thought it might interrupt the flow of things a bit if I kept getting called at. But I love doing it. I find it. I genuinely find it quite rewarding to give something back to my community. It ties in a bit with sort of the whole idea of service before self. Selflessness, and the idea of
Yeah.
joining the forces in the first place. But it's also when I started doing it when I was Brigade Major Royal Artillery, in my first proper sort of staff job, and it partly replaced the thrill of being out in the field on operations or exercise and stuff, because you
Oh
sat
yeah, yeah.
at home, and the pager goes off, and suddenly you're under pressure. You got a map read to get to the right place. You've got to find the right location. As soon as you walk into somebody's front door, you can be presented with all sorts of things. You could have the astonishing, really, really critical life or death situation presented in front of you, or you could have something completely bizarre that you weren't expecting. All spectrum of different social classes and people that you meet, and people respond differently. And and even as a full colonel with sort of 33 years, of military experience, it keeps me on my toes. It's great. It gives me adrenaline buzz, and it definitely keeps me on my toes. And I'm always drawing on my military experience. I look at some of the fellow volunteers with me, many of whom don't have the sort of same experiences that perhaps we have, and I think, wow, take my hat off to you, because I'm drawing on all of my military experience sometimes on some of these jobs. I went to one last night, where wasn't quite life or death, but it was quite a serious job, and there was all sorts of communication problems, and it was really difficult for the patient to talk and for them to hear me, and the bystanders didn't know anything about the individual, and so it's a proper Sherlock Holmes as well, trying to look at the prescription, trying to look at drugs around the room, trying to work out why this person has suddenly become quite critically ill, because by all accounts they're pretty well only a few hours earlier. So trying to piece that all together, and you're just there on your own, and you're a volunteer, and you only have a very limited scope of practice, but everybody else just looks at you in an ambulance uniform, and as far as they're concerned, you're a paramedic, and you know everything, and you're going to save the day. So you're under a lot of pressure, and I love it. It's great.
So did you come up to the end of your time in the army then? Why did you decide to leave? Or was
Uh,
the
so
opportunity to just move? Or
Yeah, I didn't have a choice really. So at 55 on a regular commission, you have to retire. Anybody that knows Brigadier James Cook, he's doing the sort of future service policies and stuff in the Army headquarters. He's a gunner officer, and I actually got in touch with him and said, James, how soon is this service to 60 come in? He said, not your time, chum. You need to go off and find a job. So that was fairly clear. And of course, not perhaps not unsurprisingly, NHS was a pretty obvious choice to at least consider. The NHS was just reorganising. They've collapsed from quite a number of what were called clinical care groups into clinical commissioning groups, into integrated care boards. So certainly in my area, Bath, Swindon and Wiltshire had 3 CCGs, and they've just created 1 integrated care board. And they were looking for chief of staff. And I've done quite a few chief of staff jobs in my military career, and I had some knowledge of the NHS. So I thought, put my hat in the ring. The chief exec is a former naval nurse. She'd done 15 years or so in the Royal Navy, and then 20 odd years in the NHS. And during the pandemic, she'd had a military chief of staff who was assigned to her as part of Rescript on the national vaccination programme. And so I think when she was looking for a chief of staff and she saw me, probably a round peg in a round hole. And I've been doing that now for 2 years. It's a fascinating situation. So our integrated care board, it's called BSW, Bath, North East Somerset, Swindon and Wiltshire Care Board, cares for 1 million patients, just under 1 million patients. 3 acute hospitals, so Bath, Swindon and Salisbury hospitals, about 86 general practices, 2 community healthcare providers. We share the Southwest Ambulance Service as an ambulance trust. So, and we coordinate all of that. So it's a big deal. We've got a staff of about 500 in our actual care board, but then we've got about 45,000 NHS workers across those organisations I just mentioned, and it's great. And I guess our main mission is to try to modernise the NHS. And if you think it's hard to modernise the army, it's even harder to modernise the NHS. It's quite a tall order. Somebody once said that there's only one thing harder than trying to get a good idea a new idea into the army, and that's to get an old one out, and that's definitely true for the NHS as well. So there's a lot to do, but the rewards, if we can get there, are rich. And one of the big thing in our strategy is what we call the left shift. So everyone will be familiar with all the pressures that are on the acute hospitals, ambulances queuing at the front door and all that sort of stuff. That problem itself is multifaceted, because that's not all about what happens at the front door. It's about trying to get people out of the hospital at the back door, and that ties in with local government and then providing care services and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of work that we do with local government, the 3 local health authorities in our local authorities in our area, but also this idea of left shift, which the furthest left of the spectrum is prevention. So prevention being better than cure. So putting lots more resources into prevention in the first place. So stop people getting ill in the first place. Then if they do get ill, try to provide much more care for them in the community. So not just GPs, but community diagnostics and stuff like that, which is good for the patients. It means they're getting treated nearer to the home. It's best for them, especially in rural areas like Wiltshire. And then really only in extremis do people end up at the hospital, either because they need pre-planned surgery or it's an emergency case. And so that's our policies, this whole left shift, to try and get a lot more prevention going on, get a lot more community diagnostics and treatment going on. But to do that, you've got to disinvest in the acute hospitals, because we've only got a limited budget like most government departments. You've got to disinvest in the acute hospitals and push that funding left. But to do that, when the hospitals are under so much pressure, is a really wicked problem, because you can't really take money away from them at the moment to create the cure for them. So, yeah, it's quite a wicked problem, but it's a sort of challenge that I like, really. So, it's a nice next move from the MOD.
I suppose some of that is the retraining of the public as well.
Yeah, there's a big part of that. So I'm one of my responsibilities as chief of staff is I'm responsible for the comms and engagement team. And funny enough, I was just having a conversation with someone today, and I said, this is, the the role of the comms engagement team is absolutely fundamental in bringing the strategy to life, because it's not just about what we do to the NHS. It's how the public use their NHS and how we help them to use it appropriately. And that's a massive challenge itself, not least of which because some people unwittingly use it inappropriately. Some people deliberately use it inappropriately. But for most people, the NHS has evolved and changed since their first encounter of their birth. And I look at myself, and I think about how the healthcare has changed while, I've gone from 0 to 56. And it's completely different, things like NHS apps and all that sort of stuff, which never existed. So trying to help everyone to properly navigate around and use the NHS properly to get the best for themselves, but also get the best as a UK taxpayer is a really fundamental part of this. And the stakes couldn't be higher. If we don't get this right, the NHS won't survive. And that's in no one's interest.
No, of course not. Right, I think we've come to the end of your story then. It's been a long one.
I do a lot of editing.
I bet you weren't expecting to sit here for two.
I thought I'd be here for half an hour.
It'll be fine. Everyone says the same thing. When I go, right, it's the end now. You've been here 2 hours. They're like, what? No, honestly.
I glanced down at the clock and went, bloody hell, is that the time?
No, honestly, thank you very, very much for coming on and doing this. And I know that a lot of people will really enjoy listening to it as well. And
it's been great, Frank. Really enjoyed it, yeah.
It's been weird calling you Richard. I don't think I'm used to it. Yeah. All right. I'll end the recording now then.
Yeah, brilliant, Frankie. Thank you.
All right.